It's adequate. Your garage doors don't have to be insulated. They're not Title 20 Ford. So I understand we're trying to keep Ambers out of a garage from starting things on fire. But I think it makes sense to possibly make an addendum to that and not wait 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak on any consent item, D1 through D5? Okay, seeing no one, we'll bring it back to council. I see we do have the fire marshal here this evening, and we did discuss this overall issue at length last meeting. I would ask the question, is this particular item something that was required by the state, or was this something that we included as a local requirement?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take a stab at this, and then if I need some help from Chief Van Son, I'll bring him up. The way the code reads is that it is a weather stripping material that complies with a couple options. And I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that it doesn't mandate a metal piece along the garage door. There are gaskets that are fire rating, which doesn't necessarily mean it has to be metal. It could be a weather stripping type material that meets that fire resistive rating.
So we're not requiring the metal for certain. We're accepting any option that's fire rated.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. I think that addresses my question. Sure, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mayor. On the fire rating, do you know what that fire rating is? Because garage doors are not fire rated that I'm aware of. I mean, not typically. So I'm wondering what the rating of the flashing or material would need to be.
Yeah, just going off of, and I'm looking at page 45. It gives an ASTM rating, and it talks about a period of 2,000 hours, and some other code type language in there that I would need Chief Van Son to answer, but I believe that is the 2,000 hours is the rating you're looking for.
That does, I mean, it's 1 hour, 2 hour, 3/4 of an hour. I
Like
mean,
90
2,000
days.
hours.
Yeah,
House is going to burn all year long. That's pretty cool.
I think it's referring to the
Days.
test. It's referring to the test that it's subjected to, and not necessarily the length of time that it withstands.
I'm sorry, but you said it in the code, it mentions that it's a certain rating or a fire rating is required. Well, maybe I mean, it sounds like it's using a terminology in a different way.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you.
Okay, does council have any, do you have another question?
Sure. Am I correct in recalling that that the garage door flashing by whatever composition, it was a new requirement from the state for that would to be applied in the very high and high fire hazard areas, and that the only optional element was whether or not we as a council would extend that requirement to new construction or really huge renovations in the in other parts of our wildland urban interface area that are not, they're in the moderate risk rather than the high and very high rates.
That is correct. That's our interpretation's already required in the very high, and we are adding to the moderate.
Okay, so we'll have those flashings in there because that's been required of the state. And anybody that's going to be building new garage doors in the area is going to be able to accommodate that for the high and very high zones. And it's only a question for the moderates.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval of the consent agenda?
Minus D6.
Minus, yeah, of items 1 through 5 of the
Got it.
consent agenda.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Funk, second by Councilmember Peak. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Peak,
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom. Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Daris,
Yes.
Mayor Verbo.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. we will proceed on to updates from the city manager, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and members of council. Glad to see you. I do have a few things. First, we want to talk about the new Lion water fountain, or the restored Lion. There is our Lion, and there's the council enjoying the rededication of Leo the Lion. He's back. It's amazing that we've seen you have your sticker there. Thank you, council member. And we do have souvenir stickers if you'd like one. And it was amazing to see people of their pictures over the generations that they were sharing prior to this. And so we're really pleased that people can enjoy Leo the Lion. Woo at the Zoo is a great hit with many Valentine's Day activities, Valentine's for the animals, the whole bit. So really a great day. Congressman Panetta was in town last week, and we had a press event with him. It was a joint news conference with the mayor and the council and the congressman announcing the allocation of $850,000 towards improvements to our police department. So we're grateful to the congressman, and appreciate the council being out there on a nice day. And we're looking forward to these really adding to our police and fire station projects, but this specifically for the police station. So we're grateful to Congressman Jimmy Panetta for his leadership. Next, I want to talk about the Firewise USA community recognition. Atascadero Fire and Emergency Services is thrilled to announce the Long Valley neighborhood has officially earned recognition as an NFPA Firewise USA community. This is the second community in Atascadero within the past 8 months to join the National Firewise program. This underscores the city's growing commitment to wildfire safety and resilience. Participating in Firewise USA provides quite a few benefits. To learn more, visit nfpa.org/education and research/wildfire/Firewise-USA. We'll make sure we post that somewhere. That's a lot. I also know of another community or two that are considering this program, and it really helps with your fire safety and insurance. So appreciate our Fire and Emergency Services Department working with neighbors on this. If you want to take a break from worrying about fires, you can go to the 2026 Central Coast Craft Beer Festival, March 21st in the Sunken Gardens. So this will be always great. We have over 55 independently owned breweries, cideries, seltzeries. We have kombucha, all kinds of good stuff. To get tickets, centralcoastbeerfest.com. It's from 12 to 4. So this event gets bigger every year, and you don't want to miss that. We have other announcements and registrations for recreation. This is last call on several things. We have T-ball on the 27th, adult basketball on the 2nd, and adult social kickball on the 23rd. So you don't want to miss those. And if you want to sponsor any of our recreation or events, it's a great way to feature your business. You can do that at events@atascadero.org. So we would love to see you be a sponsor of our events as we create memories for families and our residents and neighbors. It's a lot of fun. Farmers Market will extend to 5:30 starting on March 11th. And the time change is this March 8th, so we'll have more light. So extend to 5:30 starting on March 11th. You want to make sure you get your locally grown produce at our farmers market. If you have any questions, you can go to visit atascadero.com or atascadero.org. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
All right, thank you. Does members of the council have any questions for the city manager? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to our next item on the agenda, which is community forum. Community forum is reserved for persons wishing to address the city council on any item not on the agenda, but over which the council has jurisdiction. The Brown Act prohibits the council from entering into a discussion on matters not on the agenda, although we may at our discretion ask staff a quick question or ask staff to contact a speaker. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. We ask that you state your name for the record, and we ask that anybody wishing to speak during community forum approach the podium now.
Good evening, council and staff. Jeff Oslin once again. I have to halfway or fully commend our city and our city council and our staff. I had to endure the city of San Luis Obispo's council meeting a week ago. And let me tell you, if you'd like to know cities that are messed up and the egos that get involved, it's ridiculous. And I'm thrilled that our city definitely does not play that game, including our city manager. It is insane what one has to endure to get through a meeting with the city of SLO. So it's absolutely insane, and I do commend our council for doing what they need to do. It doesn't matter if I agree or not. I do make my valid points, but at least we're cohesive. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wishing to speak in community forum? Seeing none, I'll say thank you for the favorable comparison. We will move on. We will mention briefly that item G1, a public hearing regarding a zoning change and conditional use permit for Chick-fil-A has been canceled at the request of the applicant and will be considered at our 4 weeks from now at our March 24th meeting. So, but I did want to see, did anybody by chance come to speak on that item? Okay, great. Seeing that, we will move on to item H1, a management report, a discussion of short-term rentals. And I believe either the city attorney or council members need to speak first.
Seth Peak, I'll be recusing myself of the discussion and leaving chambers. I have a conflict of interest owning a complex in a multifamily zone, and I will be back for public comment.
Thank you.
Heather Newsom, I'll be recusing myself due to an FPPC letter ruling as well.
Okay, all right. Thank you both. And we'll give you a chance to vacate the chambers for the time being, and you can of course watch the proceedings and rejoin us during public comment. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. This is a topic we've been discussing at great length. We've done a lot of community outreach recently, and tonight we just like to discuss, what we've heard in the community and have a general discussion about where we'd like to go next with this topic. So a little background, we first brought this up at a strategic planning session back in 2024. And later that year, we actually came back to City Council to talk about a framework and some basic principles of what we would like to see in Atascadero. With that, we actually established a draft ordinance and took it to Planning Commission. But then at that point, we realized that we needed to do some more outreach. So we took a pause. We recalculated our efforts and we did a lot more outreach. And we had two very definitive outreach sessions, one in January of this year and one more recently in February of this year. One was one of our coffee with the planner sessions, very well attended. Another one was right here at City Hall in our foyer, and it was very well attended. Had a lot of great feedback from the community, sort of from both sides of the fence on this topic. Folks in support of short-term rentals, folks that wanted to see more regulation, and folks that were just there to listen. So I'm going to lay out some principles for you. Where the state kind of gives us, a basic framework. They don't allow these in accessory dwelling units. They don't allow them in the urban dwelling units, which are another form of a accessory unit on properties. And they don't allow them in units that are deed restricted as affordable. So those are the basic standards that the state gives us. And this is a good look at our Atascadero regulations and our municipal code right now. And you can see the slide is blank intentionally. We don't have a code on short-term rentals. So just thought I would throw that out there. We do have a process. We do issue business licenses. We do restrict them to one rental per property. And they must be within a legally permitted dwelling. And of course, there's the building code provisions and there's the collection of what we call TOT or transient occupancy tax. They must register for that like any other short-term rental, like hotels and motels in the community. So stats, there is a little bit of a different number in your staff report about the number of short-term rentals out there. After refining our analysis, we realized there's a lot more licenses that were issued than are actually short-term rentals that are out there. So a lot of those licenses, when we went and pulled the data, were actually delinquent and actually weren't renewed. So the true number is there's actually currently 150 licensed in the city. There are more inquiries since we began talking about this topic. It's sort of spiked in interest. I think folks think that, hey, we're going to be doing something different. So they're trying to get their foothold and get a unit, get a license. Today, actually, we had some questions about multifamily. So we did a little bit of additional research on that. And we found that out of those 150, there's only 18 that are in multifamily zoning districts. And only 2 of those are actually in multifamily structures. So a very tiny amount that are actually in apartment buildings or multifamily. Just a note, last year's fiscal year, we did receive almost $400,000 in transient occupancy tax from these licensed short-term rentals. Here's a kind of a quick map of generally where they're located, kind of evenly distributed throughout the city. those active short-term rentals and inactive short-term rentals that were, originally licensed but didn't get renewed. And then about those 18 sort of multifamily and multifamily districts with only a couple that are, actually in apartment buildings. So very, very, only two, very limited. Couple of photos from our outreach, like I mentioned earlier. There's the planner with the coffee. I think everyone's kind of bearing down on me there. That was a nice meeting. No, actually, it was really cordial. We had a lot of good conversation. And then our workshop in our foyer, that was really good as well. And that's where we were able to get some information back to the public and tell them what we heard at the previous meeting and kind of get that refined down a little bit and really have the one-on-one conversations with folks. So if I was to boil, as part of that approval process, should there be different enforcement options or parameters for these particular land uses? And communication through our departments here at City Hall. And could there be a good neighbor brochure or a similar communication that gets out there to say, here's how we expect these to operate? So generally, if I boil it down, these are the points we heard, and some really good ideas that we heard. What's happening in our county, in our region? We've also done analysis of what the other communities are doing. Some of the communities around us, especially the more tourism-related communities, do have limits. They have caps on the number of short-term rentals. They have limits on the number of people that can stay in a short-term rental. They do have density or distance limitations. They do have annual review. Most communities have an annual review, or they have a multi-year permit. And they have a permit fee with cost recovery. And it's just one way that they pay for their vendor. They have compliance tracking and tax collection, and they pay this third-party vendor to do that. And those third-party vendors go out and find the unlicensed ones and bring them into the city so we can, easily regulate those. And a lot of communities also have, in order to stay active without losing your grandfathered in status, they have to actually have a minimum number of stays each year and have a minimum contribution to the transient occupancy tax, which is a good idea. You don't want someone just to have a placeholder license, especially if you have a cap or a distance limitation, and then they're not active and then they're preventing others from starting up. They also, in these other communities, do the written notification to neighbors. And in some cases, they require owner occupancy. I know that's something that we've talked about in the past here as well as one of our prime ideas. And then there's the fire and safety inspections, which right now, we do that for new commercial business licenses. Could that happen on a new short-term rental business license? Yes, it could, but we're not doing that now. So what is the right fit for Atascadero? And that's the big question for tonight. What is right for us? Proceed under current policies or lack thereof? Certainly an option. Draft an ordinance that has standards? Absolutely an option. Draft an ordinance with standards and also establish a permit process with some cost recovery, or even for that matter, hire a third-party vendor. Also an option. So what we wanted to do is also boil it down to a menu of options kind of based on that outreach that we heard. And there's sort of themes here. I'm not going to go through all of these right now, but I suspect that if the council wants to give direction tonight for staff to come back with ordinance, we can use these items and we can use additional ones that we don't have on these lists to start getting ideas for what those could be. So we have a list that talks about addressing the overconcentration and the impacts to housing stock, a list to address the potential noise and parking issues, and a list to promote accountability, such as the items here. So I'm going to come back to those in just a minute. I do want to bring this up, though. It's Senate Bill 346. That's the Short-Term Renter Facilitator Act of 2025. It's a new state law that does actually allow cities to obtain a lot of information, such as the addresses, the APN number, and the listing from all these online short-term rental platforms so that we can get more accountability and reach out to these folks and ensure they're licensed. But in order to utilize that Senate bill, we do have to have an ordinance that specifically establishes that authority. So whether or not we actually adopt a short-term rental ordinance that has policies in it or not, this is a good idea. But of course, this could be wrapped into whatever ordinance we might adopt for short-term rentals as well. So I'm going to wrap it up. The next steps for us is really what we're asking council tonight is, do you want us to work on a short-term rental ordinance based on the criterion that we heard from the community? If so, we would develop that and we would need to bring it back to Planning Commission before bringing it back to you. And we could also do an extra stop and do additional outreach if you would like as well. I'm going to open it up now to questions, and I can go back to the list if we get there, but I'm just going to have it for questions at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dunsmore. First, I have a procedural question for legal counsel. Seeing as there's only three of us here, which is, of course, a quorum of the council itself, does that mean we need to agree unanimously on what to do this evening? Or could we do a 2-1 split, which would kind of concern me of having just two council members essentially deciding on policy? But what are we facing here rule-wise?
Understood. You can have a majority of those members on the dais this evening. We'll push forward a recommendation to staff. I'll just also reiterate that this is a discussion item, so there will be an opportunity to, once this actually gets put in ordinance format, to come back before you for discussion and future approval.
Right, and there certainly, as we go further, there's the possibility that depending on what we kind of initiate this evening, that it could potentially resolve a conflict of interest situation, perhaps.
Potentially, and we'll evaluate that as it arises.
Right. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for both myself and my colleagues here on the dais. Okay, I'm going to start on my left. Mayor Pro Tem Dares, do you have questions?
I think I'm just going to start with a comment. First comment I want to say is thank you. That was a question I was going to ask procedurally on the number of votes going to be necessary either now or in the future. I'll just start with a comment that I have on the limiting the number or the distance. My biggest concern is in multifamily. And, you know, if there's an apartment complex currently existing that has several vacancies and the owner wants to utilize that opportunity to register those as short-term rentals, but they happen to be clustered around a long-term individual who's, you know, that's their place of residence. I'm just concerned that is something that could happen and could severely affect their quality of life, something like that. So I'm just concerned about multifamily. And I'm glad to see that was one of the options of limiting or prohibiting. I'm leaning towards prohibiting, but if it's going to be limited, I want to see how that's going to go, but we can get into that. And I'm concerned about workforce housing being affected by short-term rentals being used up in that capacity. But I'm not going to have any questions at this time, but I just wanted to point that out right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We can come back to you for questions as well. So, and I have questions, but I'll defer first to my right with Councilmember Funk.
Yeah, no surprise, I have some questions. Yes, I'm sure the mayor does too. Yes. Okay. For starters, Mr. Dunsmore, you mentioned SB 346, which would allow us to get better information from Airbnb and Vrbo and those kinds of companies and figure out who's renting properties in Atascadero that doesn't have them licensed. I know that the planning staff has a huge workload right now trying to finish up the general plan and all of the related zoning work to the general plan. And so it might take some time. But would it be possible to bring back an ordinance that would allow us to move ahead on SB 346 right away or very soon and without having to resolve all these other aspects of this?
Yes, that seems fairly straightforward.
Okay. Note that I would be in favor of that. So there was a big change on the numbers from the sort of 231 total licenses that somebody might have asked about at some point. It was in our staff report versus the thing. Can you come back to that map?
Yes. And that discrepancy is really between the number of actual licenses, the number of valid licenses. So there's a issued number based or versus a what's real out there. So there's a lot of inactive. 81 were found to be inactive or delinquent that never got renewed. So when we did our first survey, it was during renewal period this year, and that's the number of renewals that went out for short-term rentals. But we realized that all we got back was 132 when they actually renewed them. So those may have historically applied, but they never renewed. So
Okay, so those are properties that had applied previously or were short-term rentals in the past,
yes,
but
correct.
where the property owner did not actively. So active is based on their licensing status as opposed to, what's going on out there online in the rental community.
Yes. So if you go on to Airbnb, VRBO, et cetera, you're probably only going to see half of that number, 40, 50, that are active at any one time because people take them on and off the market frequently or during different times of the year, which is a different number than actually what's been issued business licenses,
Sure.
which are much higher. So
Sure, that's one of the huge things that people love about this particular use is being able to rent out a property when they're, off working a job somewhere else or taking a grand vacation or those other sorts of things. Okay. One of the questions with so much, this is a large level of interest, even if it's not a huge number of actives right now. And, quite an acceleration from the 134 or what that were the number from 2024 that was reported in the staff report. So that was like 139, if I recall. So if we have that much active interest and people are maybe putting in placeholders or thinking about that, rather than having that force us to rapid action, could we grandfather, this is a legal question, could we grandfather in properties that were active short-term rentals prior to the date where this first came to, the ordinance was first presented to council? That would have been what, October 2025? Or 2024? Okay, sorry. That's right, 2024.
So I believe that was an aspect of the ordinance that originally came to you a few months ago. There was a grandfathering period roped into that, so we could do that, and you can adjust at what date that grandfathering, you set that grandfathering provision.
Sure. Okay. So that, people who were already invested in that before they knew that we might consider placing some restrictions could be treated in a different way than we would treat people who have been piled on afterwards.
That's correct. I believe the policy in the last ordinance was that they would eventually have to come into compliance with the current ordinance, but I might be misremembering that.
They were grandfathered in as long as they remained active. And we had a stipulation in that original ordinance about, similar to what these other communities are doing, is that you've got to remain active by having participation in the program, bringing in a transient occupancy tax in the previous quarter. We had basically some thresholds for that.
Okay.
So if someone just sat with a business license for 6 months, but didn't actually utilize their short-term rental, then they would become inactive and they no longer would be grandfathered in. And I'm just saying 6 months is a random time frame because we can do any time frame.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that's an active listing in terms of rental activity as opposed to an active permit in terms of licensing.
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry to be specific about how we're using the language, but it does get confusing. Okay. I want to come back to some questions with regard to fire safety. I have talked about this from the dais previously on a number of occasions about this particular issue because when we let people come into the community as renters, they are definitionally less familiar with this community than the people who live here. And they're on vacation and they're going to not be as attentive as to the consequences of their actions as somebody who's not on vacation. So this raises risks, and it's just too easy for somebody to do something stupid and start a fire that burns the place down. We have to be attentive to that, even if it's not a thing that happens real often, it could. So to the end of thinking about that, I want to come back over to Chief Bryson here on this question. If we were to put some regulations, as we see in some other high fire risk areas, that limit guests' ability to have open fires and wood-fired stoves and bonfires, campfires, those kinds of open things, or charcoal things, anything that casts embers. Would the fire department be okay with us allowing gas grills and gas fire pits or propane?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the fire department would be just fine with that. I think if we eliminated, like a backyard burn pit outside, we wouldn't want, wood fire, campfire. I think we could have an ordinance that says we don't allow that, but a propane barbecue or propane gas fire pit would be acceptable to the fire department.
Okay. And is that something that would be reasonably easy to check for during an initial inspection at the time that an operator gets a permit to run the place as an Airbnb?
That may be a question for Director Dunsmore. I'm not sure on the process of the permitting. We typically do not inspect short-term rentals currently, but I think on the permit process, we could factor that in.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. That could be done by the building people as opposed to the fire people.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Just trying to see if we have a process to enforce it that would be simple and not too burdensome on everybody involved. Okay. If we were to establish some standards about guest behavior or some things that we want rental guests to know, like how to evacuate in the event of a wildfire and where to get information, also what our local fireworks ordinance is, and the good neighbor policies, whatever of that we might want to have communicated. Would it be possible to have an agreed upon, set of things to be communicated, a text that the city puts up, say on its website, and that operators would then be responsible for getting to their guests in some fashion?
Yes, that was one of the sort of ideas in the menu, is to have this handout that's required for each of the owners to give to each of the renters. And it's something that we have in our, that we could create in our ordinance that already has a draft set of standards that we want to be conveyed. So that's a very simple thing to do. You can give it out. But then again, there's human behavior. So.
Right. Well, there is human behavior, but at least you start out by making sure that there's information. And then the closing of the loop would be, is there a way to have, if a neighbor observes a violation of those standards, because the neighbors would need to get that information too. And if the neighbor observes somebody lighting a bonfire next door that they're not supposed to do in a short-term rental, that would there be a mechanism that they could call? If we require a local contact, they would have to call that local contact, or for certain violations, could directly call the police.
Yes, these are all options that we have.
Okay. And then for parking, if we set a required amount of parking, or require that the parking be on site, and that they have enough on-site parking to handle the expected load of guests, say, one per bedroom or something similar. Would it be feasible when you go out and do an inspection at the time of permitting to allow use of of street parking if it happens to be in an area where there's extra space on side of the road. It's not going to be in anybody's way. It's not going to harm anybody. You could have a practical exception that it actually works without inconveniencing the neighbors or creating safety hazards.
Yes, typically we'd require that they have a certain amount of on-site parking, but if the council wanted to be more flexible and say that, some guest parking may be in the street in particular areas where that's satisfactory, that's also an option. So you can put in whatever you want. The typical single-family residence has a parking requirement of 2 parking spaces, and most of them have 2 parking spaces plus two guests available. So most of them do have 4 on site.
Okay. Because that's always the challenge, that if neighbors, we have so many streets that do not have street parking, or where people who show up and there's no place to put their car, they're going to put the car someplace anyway. That you create problems along the side of the road and vehicles in spaces that are unsafe and create traffic hazards and drive everybody nuts. Okay. One last thing for right now. One of the things that I find so attractive is the chance people have to handle family sort of transitions, people who already live here. So if we were to create a process, if we apply limits of some fashion, either number or proximity, to how many overall short-term rentals we have, would it be possible to have a simple exception process that was doesn't go to the planning commission or us, but is administratively handled, for the owner or of who's somebody who is for this house, where the house is their primary resident, or the representative of that owner, to come in and get a time-limited permit to use the place as an Airbnb to handle family situations. What I'm looking for is the general spirit of grandma has a stroke. She's going to be in rehab for 6 months. She might be able to be well enough to come back to that house, but we don't know. And meanwhile, renting it out as an Airbnb, if you spiff it up, would create enough revenue that you can afford to do the renovations grandma needs to move back into that house. That's the sort of thing that supports our residents in managing their lives and staying connected with this community, that I'd like to see us find a way to accommodate. And so I just want to know, if we did that, can that be done without it being excessively burdensome or creating too much arm twisting to you guys?
Yes, that's very feasible. What I'm hearing from you is that you would make a suggestion that you would have more flexible standards in density and concentration for a residence that is their primary residence that's generally owner occupied, and that they would apply for an administrative use permit to exceed, the density in their neighborhood, and therefore be able to get a short-term rental permit. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's roughly it. So get a short-term rental period, permit that runs for a year, and maybe you can renew it for a year if circumstances continue, and then you can't keep doing it forever, but it might, or maybe you renew it long enough that the state can be probated in those kinds of situations, so that people can deal with those transition moments, intergenerational.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That'll do me for right now.
All right, thank you. I have a couple questions, and to follow on that, though, when we talk about some of these things, they only would come into play if we had a cap on number of rentals, short-term rentals, or distance limitations. If we don't have those two things, then some of these things wouldn't apply, correct? We wouldn't need to address them because they wouldn't be an issue. Is that
correct?
Fair analysis?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So I am the one, who actually for multiple years asked to put this item on the agenda. And then in 2024, we had a consensus at strategic planning to put it on the agenda. And you outlined where we've been since then. And my thought process had always, or my concern had always been houses that are essentially only used as short-term rentals. Because if they're only used as short-term rentals and they're not used as dwellings, I had two concerns. One is that's a house that's not available to a resident of Atascadero to live in. It's not available for, let's say, as a move-up home for a young growing or medium growing family, that would like to move up to a higher priced home. It's not available to them because it's taken out of housing inventory. So that was one concern. But the other primary concern was that essentially a home that is only used as a rental is effectively a hotel or a commercial lodging establishment in a residential neighborhood. And a concern that that's not what our neighbors sign up for when they buy a single family home. So that being said, I did not really consider the multifamily issue. And when I look, and that's why I asked this morning, and I'm very pleased that you gave the answer, that of how many actual multifamilies do we have? And really, we have 18 in multifamily zones, but all but two of those are really effectively houses that happen to be in multifamily zones, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So we only have two, short-term rental permits, business permits that actually are utilizing a multifamily structure.
And they're actually just duplexes. They're not apartment buildings, really.
Understand?
So, yes.
And so what I'm getting at there, want to understand, I was looking at in the staff report, you have this very eye-challenging little.
I'm sorry.
In like
Size 3 font.
Size
Yes.
3 font, yeah. And as I get older, that's harder to read. And what I was having difficulty seeing on this, so my question is, with other communities, as near as I can see with my, declining vision, I don't see any reference to how multifamily is handled in these other communities in the county. Can you address how it is?
I don't know that they parsed those out, and I don't know that we did that level. I'm wondering if one of our, a couple of our planners are here. I wonder if they had any of that info that they parsed out. And, if you do, come on up. But if you didn't, then.
Yeah, I mean,
Eric Gomez, our associate planner, would love to
I
have it.
didn't understand from the city manager, who had been the city manager in Pismo Beach, that they allowed multi-family STRs in a certain, kind of beachfront tourist oriented zone, but otherwise not. But I'm wondering about the other communities.
Yeah, generally, there are limitations on multifamily zones. There are, and I'm not going to specify exactly which cities, but there are some that just do not allow it. There are some that limit them just to hosted or owner-occupied rentals, where essentially it's a room share or a homestay, as they're called. But there are typically stronger limitations to multifamily residences that kind of offer more control of the guests.
Okay. Because I mean, on the one hand, one would look at our multifamily and say, hey, this is our workforce housing, and, we shouldn't be having it be utilized as STRs. But on the other hand, two tells me we don't have a problem, is what I would see. And that's why I wonder what other communities do, because it seems to me that it sounds like, other than the occasional person wanting to rent out a spare bedroom in a 2-bedroom place or something, this really, on the multifamily side, really doesn't seem to be an issue.
Correct. Yeah. In our city, we have 2 units right now that are in a multifamily structure. They're both duplexes. I believe there are 3 units that are single family residences, where there's like an apartment building in the back also, but they wanted to keep that single family residence up front, and those are rented also.
Got it. Okay. Because I don't, want to be, I wanted to consider this entire issue before it became a big problem. But on the other hand, I don't want to, try to come up with a solution where there's not a problem, a solution in search of a problem. So I'm kind of inclined to think that perhaps the multifamily aspect, even though Mayor Pro Tem, brought up a fair concern, I'm just not seeing that doesn't seem by the numbers to be a significant issue. So, okay. So thank you for that. In terms of council indicated in answer to a question, we could choose a grandfather date. I mean, it could be today, it could be August when the planning commission looked at the draft ordinance. It could be October 24 when we discussed it. That could be any time we would choose, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, and then currently we don't do, as the fire chief noted, any inspection. I mean, you get your business license, say, I want to run a STR, get a business license for it, sign up to pay the transient occupancy tax. And really that's all we do. So we don't currently inspect. And in the draft ordinance and presented to the planning commission in August, there was a mention of that there could be an application and inspection fee that could be in the range of $800 to $1,100. And that seems pretty high because my objective here isn't to charge a lot of fees, it's just apply some control for the benefit of neighbors. What would be the basis of that being that high, if you will?
Those numbers were derived assuming 1 to 2 inspections of a property and also assuming the use of a third-party vendor to find the additional rentals maybe out there and to help with the collection of transient occupancy tax and to have a sort of an application process online. And so we're finding that a lot of other communities are charging fees around that level so they can have cost recovery for that third-party vendor and to do their inspections. So that's not just solely the inspection when we throw out a number like that. There's other pieces to that story.
Don't we already use a third-party vendor to identify listings that don't have licenses?
One of our vendors that currently works with our finance team does some of that work, and perhaps our finance director can fill in what that consultant currently does in that endeavor. And they offer additional services, but we're not using the full extent of their services.
We did actually have some services that the T-bid board was paying for. Those have been terminated for a year, couple of years maybe. And we do currently use HDL for companies for collection of TOT, and they do offer a service as part of our contract. We're not currently paying for that service, but we could engage them or others like them to do that searching process.
Okay. I thought part of the premise of paying for that kind of service was that in some cases they didn't charge very much because they took a cut of the additional revenue that, we got if they ferreted out people who weren't properly licensed, who then had to pay TOT in arrears or.
That's not currently the way that our contract is structured.
Okay. Could it be?
We could either renegotiate with HDL or negotiate with a different contractor for sure.
Okay. And along those lines, if through this process, because right now, if we discover that, this person has an STR listing on Airbnb or VRBO, and they don't have a license with us and they haven't been paying TOT, right now, that's simply just an ordinance violation with a simple, $100 and then a $200 fine. And under an ordinance like this, we could charge a much greater fine because that's who we're looking for, is the people who are doing this illegally. So we could have, right now, there's hardly any penalty for doing this on the side, right? Based on what I'm hearing?
Not really much of a penalty, no. Our goal instead of a penalty would be actually to have them come in and get the business license and register for TOT. I don't think we would issue them a citation right off the bat unless they didn't comply.
Right, but do we even have a mechanism of then trying to figure out how much they owe us in back bed tax?
If we can find out how long they've been operating, I suppose we could go after that, but that would be a whole nother legal avenue to have to go down.
So as part of an ordinance like this, though, we could put in the framework penalties for failure to obtain a proper business license and failure to pay TOD, penalties with teeth, correct?
Certainly, you can put your own enforcement mechanisms into an ordinance like we have in a lot of our provisions in our municipal code, yes.
You could also have that person be invalidated from getting a license for a couple of years,
right?
While they had to sit it out, or if they had a license, they could lose it for a couple of years. I'm pleased too with Senate Bill 346. I think we'll see as this gets enacted and rolls out into implementation, this allows us to ask online platforms like Airbnb and VRBO to share their listing data. And I would think we could get some historical data from that. And so we could actually use that historical data to see if a person had been renting and what tax they had or hadn't been paying. So I think we have an additional tool.
I mean, if we find out somebody's been doing this and they owe us $5,000 of TOT, that's A, the biggest piece, but B, there should be some penalty for them having to fail to play the game properly. I.e. pay up, or your license is suspended until you pay up, and then you're ineligible for a period of time or what have you. But that could be included in any ordinance we've pushed, right? Okay. I have more questions. I'm going to let you go ahead. Looks like you have a related question.
Yeah. Question would be, since the people we really want to have pay that, pay for the service that finds the scofflaws who are skating on the system are the scofflaws who are skating on the system, not the legitimate owners that are paying their TOT. Is it possible to set up a cost recovery or a fine process so that if we catch you not having registered and not having paid TOT, that you would have to pay extra into the so that the cost of looking for those folks would be paid by those people ultimately? Not necessarily precisely, but in sort of general. It's possible for us to set up a fee or fine that way.
I suppose that's one way to look at it. It'd probably be better to have a cost recovery that's spread across all of the applicants, but that's one way to certainly do that. But I think it's part of the penalty process, really, is what you're
I sort of
alluding to.
My model for that would be what we do with the weed abatement fees.
Oh,
where
yeah.
the weed abatement, the cost of surveying everybody for their weed abatement is paid for by the people who didn't abate their weeds and not paid for by the people who did.
Regarding
deal.
penalties on short-term rentals, I think, and my former life was a place where there were a lot of these. This is a privilege to use your home as income, and I think that's something the council's weighing this evening. And I think the biggest penalty is losing the privilege. That's always the biggest. People do not want to lose the ability to rent their home if they're caught or behind in pay. You can always have back fees for TOT. I think, though, a note on fines, and this is important, because there's so much money exchanged in this type of use, you need to make sure that just standard municipal code fines of $100 or $250 don't cut it, because they become a cost of doing business. And so usually you can see fines in these areas of thousands of dollars. We had a case in my former role that a person was illegally renting, and we went to court, and they were issued a judgment in 5 figures of fines, and that held. And so it was tens of thousands of dollars. And so these are held in court in our county if you set the fine system right. So that is another option.
I'll also just add that state law has increased fines for short-term rentals violations related to health and safety. So the state authorizes that. So opposed to your 100, 250, 500, you're looking at 1,500, 3,000, and 5,000 for those subsequent violations. So that also increases the penalties when you're looking at health and safety violations related to short-term rentals.
Okay, thank you. And on the line of, inspecting the properties, I didn't catch it on here, but are we the only ones that let somebody open up an STR without any inspection?
No, there are City of
others.
Paso Robles, they don't have inspections, for example.
Okay, that's good to know for comparison purposes. Okay, I actually have a few more questions, but what I'd like to do is open it up to public comment. I'd like to hear people from the public speak on this item, and then, because some of my further questions really fall, kind of lean into comments a little bit. And I think this is a situation where council is just going to be providing guidance for a potential ordinance. We can kind of talk through some of that. So I'd like to open it up to public input, and of course, let council members Peak and Newsom know that now would be the time to come back up and make their public comment as citizens. But if you were interested in making public comment, please approach the podium, and if you would, and don't wait for everybody in front of you to finish speaking. Go ahead and first speaker, approach the podium if you would. And you have 3 minutes, and please state your name for the record.
Sarah Majalay, owner of Templeton Vacation Rentals. I'm also a member of the AT bid. I appreciate, first of all, the workshop that we just had recently. I thought that was well attended and they really did seek out some great feedback. It was great to see so many people there, including some of our council members. So I really encourage that type of outreach. I think that all of us there felt very heard, so I appreciate that. Some of the comments that I would like to highlight here regarding street parking. As an operator, as someone who manages 30 properties, most of them in the North County, including several here in Atascadero, I think that you can say no street parking. If the home doesn't have enough parking for the people they're inviting and they're sharing with, then they need to rethink their business model. So I think saying no street parking is totally acceptable. And I am just speaking for myself. I don't want to say that I'm speaking for any other operators or hosts, but I think that is a totally reasonable thing. Regarding fire safety, I think it's important that we don't let any kind of creep here. We can't say that people can't have a fire in a fire pit in their backyard. If they have a fire pit in their backyard, that's opening yourself up to legal. Where's the slippery slope there? Now we can't have a hot tub or a swimming pool. I don't want us to react too severely to the incident that happened last summer, where apparently it was a short-term rental and it was a gusty day and the barbecue blew some embers. That's the story I heard. That could happen to anybody. Let's not try to create a solution for a problem we don't have. Fire safety is important. I would say it's not more or less important to the guests that have been coming to Atascadero for decades. But that was a scary incident last summer. But I don't want to make sweeping decisions about private property usage based on that incident. Am I doing on time here? No, I say no multifamily. That's your workforce housing. Let's present, if we're going to do a limit on the number of licenses, let's present our best product. Let's get tourists here staying in the most beautiful homes Atascadero has to offer, and let's save the multifamily housing for the workforce, because we need them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor. Oops, sorry. Well, I'm going to tip it over. Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Renelle Porter, and I'm a resident of Atascadero. I'm not here to argue for or against short-term rentals as a concept. I'm here to ask that environmental risk and community safety be central to your decision. Atascadero sits in a high and very high fire hazard region. Land use decisions in that context carry consequences beyond individual properties. Full-time residents understand defensible spaces, red flag conditions, and evacuation routes. Visitors, by definition, are unfamiliar with these realities. That difference matters in a wildfire-prone community. As you evaluate short-term rentals, I encourage you to consider the cumulative environmental impacts, including wildfire exposure, increased turnover and peak occupancy in high fire hazard areas can complicate evacuation and emergency response. Infrastructure compatibility. Many neighborhoods, particularly those near open space, were designed for low-density residential living, not transient lodging. Narrow roads and limited evacuation routes should be carefully evaluated. Emergency response strain. Higher occupancy and unfamiliar guests can increase call volume and coordination challenges during peak seasons and red flag events. Water consumption. Studies have shown that short-term rentals often use more water per guest night than hotels, largely due to frequent linen turnover, laundry cycles, and higher short-stay consumption patterns. In a drought-prone region, cumulative demand matters. Insurance markets instability. Wildfire risk is already affecting homeowners across California. My own insurance was recently canceled and replacement cost coverage cost roughly 3 times as much as we had been paying. Risk exposure affects the entire community. These are not abstract concerns, they are practical realities in a fire-prone region. If short-term rentals are permitted or expanded, I urge you to incorporate safeguards in high fire hazard areas, require clear evacuation information for guests, and evaluate infrastructure capacity along with policy changes. Environmental stewardship in Atascadero is not ideological. It is responsible governance in the face of real environmental constraints. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Kay Porter. I'm a resident of Atascadero. I've lived more or less all over the county since 1994. I'm for short-term rentals, but I want them to have restrictions. Without restrictions, we have no recourse when something does happen. So I want us to, and you have been thinking ahead about what kind of restriction to put in. I would like to have no corporate owners. Only residents of Atascadero can have a short-term rental. If you want a long-term rental, buy yourself a hotel. I think that they need to give the renter some instructions, like teenagers have a tendency to build fire pits wherever they want to, and regardless of, and they're just unaware. And it should be prohibited by the landlord. And they shouldn't go and buy a barbecue grill for the weekend so that they have a big barbecue. That should not be allowed. The landlord should have, if they want something like that, the landlord should supply a propane fire pit or something of that ilk. I think that the fire department should require a short-term rental to have a defensible area. Not all homeowners do, but being a short-term rental puts them in a special group. So they should operate to different standards. The house I live in has shrubbery right up against the house. I don't think a short-term rental should be allowed to do that. And they should also have posted evacuation routes. On a different subject, there's nothing to make your neighbors more angry than over parking an area. That they should be required to have on-site parking only, and they should be told not to have visitors parking on the street. Because I have grandchildren that lived in Slow near the college, and believe me, they can overwhelm a street. And I also worry about the noise, but I don't know that there's a whole lot we can do about it. I'm sure the police have their standards and that we could call in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Tori Keene. I'm here to express my concerns regarding short-term vacation rentals in Atascadero. At a recent Planning Commission meeting, one argument presented was that vacation rentals bring meaningful business to Atascadero. However, based on my own review of listings, which I provided to the City Council earlier today, many properties heavily market proximity to Paso Robles wine country, San Luis Obispo, and nearby beach towns, rather than highlighting Atascadero itself. In fact, of 8 recent reviews I examined, not reviews, it's descriptions of the properties, 5 did not meaningfully mention Atascadero at all. This strongly suggests that many visitors are using these properties primarily as lodging while spending the bulk of their time and money outside our city. In that sense, short-term rentals do not appear to generate substantially more local economic benefit than traditional hotels. Meanwhile, the financial gains from these properties flow primarily to the individual owners, often those fortunate enough to own multiple homes, while the broader community absorbs the impacts. Every home converted to a full-time short-term rental is one less home available to local families and workers in an already constrained housing market. Housing data underscores this concern. Like much of San Luis Obispo County, Atascadero faces limited housing supply and rising costs. The California Department of Housing and Community Development has assigned local jurisdictions aggressive regional housing needs allocations, or RHINA, targets to address statewide shortages. At the same time, rental vacancy rates in the region have remained tight, and home prices have risen significantly over the past several years, putting homeownership further out of reach for many working families. When existing housing stock is diverted into short-term rentals, it directly conflicts with the community's obligation to expand, not reduce, long-term housing availability by limiting options for homeownership beyond starter homes. I want to be clear that my position is not anti-visitor or anti-tourism. I have personally used short-term rentals when traveling with my family, and I understand the appeal, particularly the convenience of having a kitchen. However, Atascadero has already approved at least two hotel-type lodging projects that include kitchen facilities, which helps address that need without permanently removing housing from the local market. I've also heard the reasonable point that whole home rentals can accommodate larger families and groups. While that demand is real, it must be balanced against the needs of the people who live and work in Atascadero year-round. Our first responsibility should be preserving housing stability and neighborhood integrity for residents of Atascadero. For these reasons, I support the original proposal that came before the Planning Commission in August. They included approval of a short-term rental permit, issuance of a business license, annual permit and license renewal with compliance standards, owner occupancy requirements, a 24/7 local contact for emergencies, posted public notice prior to permit approval, meaningful penalty fees, and permit revocation authority. And I also included that original thing in my email earlier today. I don't have enough time for the rest of my comments, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, I'm Kathy Reed. I'm a resident of Atascadero. And I just have a few comments. I too use short-term rentals on vacation and love them. I have lived close to one here. There weren't any serious problems, but all the neighbors were very concerned about the noticeable noise and increased traffic and parking. The house did sell to a regular owner, and so we were kind of relieved. But I really worry about our scarce housing supply and the troubling reports of corporations buying up housing to use as short-term rentals, and I would hate to see that happen here, both because we need the housing, and if somebody's going to make money off of this service to the community, I'd rather it just be regular people who actually live here. I also worry about the fire risk. I think there should definitely be restrictions on the number and the type and the quality of units. And I think it makes sense to inspect and permit all existing units, even if they're grandfathered in, to have some control over that, as well as some kind of annual review. And I'm also strongly in favor of hosted versus unhosted units as a priority to be considered in the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Familiar face.
Heather Newsom. It's been a while since I stood on this side. I don't know if I can conform to 3 minutes, so here we go. I get to represent myself as a rental, vacation, short-term rental and vacation out of the area, Airbnb. I do have experience over the years to knowing what it takes to operate as well as to interact with my neighbors, so I speak on that behalf. I think it's important to maintain residents' property rights. Our ordinance that we all cannot seem to agree on should be something that is practical, not restrictive. We should be able to use our properties the way we choose. Some of us choose it as a means of retirement income. I would rather have an Airbnb than deal with eviction process. Dealing with tenants can be very expensive and very time consuming. Our eviction took almost a year. I think it's important to be flexible in use of a property that fits an owner's needs. That can change from year to year depending on that purpose. A grandfather clause you mentioned is for those that are currently active. You spoke about having inactive short-term rentals of 81. What you're not aware of is the noticing that went out to the existing Airbnbs went from a paper notice to an email notice. So I'm not sure if the city has contacted those 81 people that did not renew to see if they just didn't get it in their spam. Fees should be reasonable. I don't think it's affordable for us to pass on a third-party vendor to our short-term rental owners. It's too costly to pass on to residents. They already struggle with expensive cost of living property taxes. I think it's important that we can come to agreement that there is some clarity that will come with SB 364 And I think sometimes if we can't come to an agreement that's super restrictive, perhaps we wait and get guidance from those that are getting ready to mandate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Seth Peak, Atascadero resident, property owner. To be clear, I do not operate an Airbnb. I don't plan on it. I used to 8 years ago. Don't recommend it to anybody else. Was a homestay. My wife and I did homestay. I mean, we rented a room in our house for 3 years to pay for half our mortgage. I think Airbnb is a great thing for someone who can do it within the confines of policy and ordinance. I think it's important if we do policy as a citizen, as a resident of Atascadero. I want my city to create policy on issues that are rampantly issues. We had connectivity issues downstairs, so I couldn't hear the whole report, but I wasn't sure, and I don't expect an answer right now, if we had a clear idea of how many police calls we get for noise complaints. I do understand that the main issues I hear from people is, parties, pools, keggers, parking on these SFRs. I think having multifamily, creating a policy for multifamily when we have zero issues with multifamily is just creating policy for policy's sake, and I'm against that most of the time. So I'm just here to say that as a person who lives in an SFR neighborhood, owns a multifamily unit, different areas in town, I don't think we need to create a policy for an area that doesn't seem to have an issue with 2 people, duplexes. We have other multifamily owners that used to have Airbnb in their building and decided to go to long form because it made more financial sense. So I don't think we see the trend the other way. During COVID, we had a boon. Everyone was traveling all the time, and Airbnbs were getting a lot more popular. Nowadays, with a 6% mortgage rate, you're not going to be able to turn a Atascadero house into an Airbnb that pencils out unless you have a really long game and lots of cash. So while there might be rules and regulations necessary for people to enjoy their habitation, their house, I think multifamilies, it's pointless at this time to create policy for an area that doesn't warrant it at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Jeff Oslin, resident here. I don't technically have any skin in the game for Airbnb. I've never done it. I do have regular rental property, and my points are this. Some of the problems that have been brought up by staff in their outreach and council in your outreach is really simple. We have noise complaints with a few people. We have issues with a few of our Airbnbs. Why add more regulation? Why don't we add enforcement? We already have things on the books. We have noise ordinances. I believe they're 9 or 10 o'clock at night, but they're never addressed. Our code enforcement is slow to enforce, and our police are tied up. I think adding more regulation is not feasible. I'd like to know which council members on this stand actually have had donations from hoteliers, because I think some of this regulation is pushed from hotel folks. Although I do, when I have family or parties, book hotels and get great rates and whatnot in this town, I think it's fine. But I also have some families that can't stay in a hotel room. This has been brought up before. They need an Airbnb. When I was a kid, we had wasn't called Airbnb at the time. We stayed at a house in Sunnyvale with a couple of our families and a swimming pool and had a great time. I don't remember it being out of control. As far as one of our speakers, who is at the time was the chair, I don't know if she still is or not, of our planning commission, I think those comments are with prejudice. We had problems at that planning commission. And once again, I don't know if all those comments are valid. The other things I would put in is this the next step to be like the city at the south? What are we going to do next? Ask for a rental registry? Have to pay for a rental registry? Are we going to put in rent control next? We already have it with the state. I don't see the need for the regulation. I see the need to enforce what we already have in code on the books. And I do agree with the new state law that you should pass that ordinance so you can have access so we're not missing our T and TOT tax. Lastly, I know our city attorney is not here tonight, our regular one. That's not David sitting over there. I'd like to know the name of our city attorney. I think that's a fair thing because that marker does not have the name. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Tom Foran, and I'm a resident of Atascadero for over 40 years. And I want to thank the planning department for having their workshops. I attended both of them. And I'm an unhappy neighbor, and I met several other people that have the similar situation. And we have a swimming pool next door, which happens to be 50 feet from my master bedroom window. And the primary people that come to the Airbnb next door are young families, which is fine, but there's another group that are young adults, and they come in to enjoy the Central Coast. They go out partying, and when they come home at night on a warm summer night, they want to go in the pool. And this goes on at 2 a.m. It goes on at midnight, and I've complained, and the complaints go to the people that made the noise, but they don't come back again. So there's really no enforcement for the noise that I experience. I can't call anybody. Who do I complain to? So that's my unhappy neighbor story. And there were several other people that also had swimming pool issues with inebriated young adults. And I was one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Please, if anybody else wishes to speak, please come towards the podium now.
Hi, I'm Louis Soloff. I live in Atascadero, and I have a short-term permit in another city, actually another state. And this, I guess what I'm going to say is sort of relevant to that. There was an issue that came up here about the placeholder license, people getting licenses and just sort of sitting on them. Well, I guess I've had a placeholder license in this other jurisdiction, and I got it because it was my assumption when the short-term rental program began that eventually, because of mission creep, that they would just become unavailable at some point. So I figured, well, I better rush in here and get this and pay in that case, it's still over $300 a year, and keep this alive in a kind of moribund but alive state. So, I don't think that's such a bad thing for because people need to plan for their retirement. So say you're planning for your retirement and you assume that, your house is your major asset and you're going to be able to actually get some return on the rental market. And then you can imagine that just as you get ready to retire, they change the rules. So I don't think that's so bad. I haven't lived here that long. I've lived here for about 8 years. And one of the things that drew me here was the unregulated nature of this area. And I realized that has drawbacks, but I thought that was rather charming. And when I talked to my friends about how wonderful Atascadero is, this is the first thing that I mentioned. Okay, sometimes it seems a little chaotic, but they're not over-regulating. I'm from more recently I've lived in Los Angeles. The mission creep in the jurisdiction, I'm not going to mention where it is, but anyway, it started out that I would just, every year I would write a check, and I would mail it to the short-term office, and I would note my address. And that was the extent of my effort. Well, the latest renewal, and I'm continuing to renew this in its dormant state, requires that I list every single person who came for the entire year, exactly who they are, what days they stayed, exactly how much they paid. And this is just one of like 14 new requirements. So I guess I would object because I can foresee the mission creep that's going to happen, and it's just never going to end. At least it didn't there. And I guess I'd like to, they actually had it to the point in this latest renewal where it was a requirement on the part of people who are trying to renew their short-term license. They had to go on the city GIS site, Geographic Information System, the GIS site, and actually figure out how to extract data for a 200, foot radius map. All the 30 or 40 addresses that are involved, they had to do this on their own. And I mean, I'm a surveyor. I do this kind of stuff all the time, and it was daunting for me. I couldn't imagine how a normal citizen would have actually been able to deal with that. Now they're all of a sudden a city worker. Oh, I'm sorry, I've run
Yeah,
out of
your
time.
time is up if you could.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. All right, seeing nobody else approach, we're going to close public comment on this item. I don't know why the slide says community forum, but and then we're going to bring it back to the council, keeping in mind that, our purpose this evening is to provide guidance to staff. We're not here to write an ordinance per se, so we don't need to get into too much detail. I think we need to provide feedback to staff on what do we want to see an STR ordinance, and B, what features would we want it to include? And so, like for one, I kind of agree that the multifamily, even though people who run them think it's okay to say no multifamily, I just don't see that as an issue with only 2 examples in the city in a duplex. It's, again, I go with the concept of we don't need to regulate something that's not a problem. We always could go back later if that became a problem. So that, for example, I'm just using that as an example of one thing where my objective is, of course, keep whatever we do as simple and clear cut as possible. What I'd like to ask my 2 colleagues up here to do is first kind of go through some of the features. And if you still have questions, that's fine. But to kind of go through, let's talk about, do we kind of go down the list? Do we need an ordinance? And I'll start with Councilmember Funk.
Sure. I want to start by just letting folks know. I know that we have colleagues that aren't up here with us whose conflicts relate to properties that they own or presumably do, and that's so. If you feel like they're not here to speak for you, recognize we're listening. We're listening to everyone. I take everyone's things. And one of the things I learned from being at the workshop myself, and in other conversations is the yin and yang to the mayor's comment about wanting to, expecting that as a property owner that somebody won't turn the place next to you into a commercial commercial property, commercial establishment. The people who really like being able to own these properties, manage these properties, develop this aspect of showing off Atascadero and like what it does. So there are benefits to allowing this. And it also, as I commented earlier in my questions, as I noted, it's really great for managing a lot of life situations. Whether you're a young couple starting out and renting the other half of the duplex or your room so that you can afford the mortgage, or you have whatever, or you have a family in transition, or grandma's and getting in rehab. It's all of those things are really helpful. So I think that it's worth our thinking about how do we manage the things that are the downsides? Because this is the community that we create together is the goose that lays this golden egg. I mean, it's a golden egg. I mean, it's a very profitable use of property. But as council members, our number one job is to look after the health of the goose, not to try to let more people grab golden eggs. We have to, the goose first. So we have to care for the nature of the whole community. And within that context, look for other ways we can allow people to pursue this use that don't, where the impacts on other folks in the community can be reasonably managed without a huge load of bureaucracy, without a ton of cost, without it getting convoluted, with something that is reasonably enforceable, so that the neighbors who experience this impact know who to call, what to do, and can get some accountability for it. And there are real consequences to somebody if they create a situation that is
problematic. So anyway, that's kind of the general thing where I come from. And I also think that we'll come back to the fire risk thing.
Right.
But I do want to talk about that.
So you're
specifically.
saying, you do think we need an ordinance of some
Yeah,
sort?
so I think
Okay, got
I
it.
think we need an
Got it.
ordinance. I think if we've had enough growth in this, and this is also precisely the kind of thing where if we wait until it's a big problem, it is too late to manage it. We can't, so we have to anticipate the potential for issues when the operator of the short-term rental takes in the benefits and the costs are incurred by other people in the community. We have to be the ones to anticipate that and deal with it.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Dares, just if you could address the,
Just
the
put
need
us
for an
on that.
ordinance. Yeah,
You're gonna.
and then we'll go
Got it.
through each
Okay.
thing.
So yes, I absolutely think we need to have an ordinance on this to, hate to use the word regulate, but yes, I think there needs to be some guidance on how short-term rentals are going to be used. My feeling is, the more Airbnbs become popular and start to compete with the hotels, the more places like multifamily dwellings are going to start to be used, and that's going to have a serious effect, like I said, on the quality of life for people that are living there and have limited choices of where else they can go. Young people in particular, when they're on vacation for a week and a half, whatever it might be, it's a 24-hour party, and I get that. I mean, the older I get, it might be a 24-hour party, but it's a lot more tame. So I'm not going to keep my neighbors up. I might not be out till 2 o'clock in the morning, but I haven't stayed in an Airbnb, but if I did and I was in a city where I've got family and hey, come on over, we'll play cards and do whatever. We could be up till late at night. And if the music's playing or if the window's open, it's a nice warm day and we're talking loud. It happens. One of the speakers here, sir, sorry, I don't remember your name, but my neighbors were on vacation and were gone for several days, with less than a week, but more than 3 or 4 days. So they had some young people staying to watch the house. And I had exactly that same thing. It was summertime. The windows were open for my bedroom at night. Right across the fence was their pool. And these kids it was loud and screaming and jumping in the pool. And I had to call. I had to call and tell them to cut it out. And my neighbors felt bad about it. But these kids, they were just having fun. They didn't realize that they were making so much noise that it was affecting the neighbors. And if my neighbors were to move to another house and have that house that's next to me used as a short-term rental in that capacity, I would not be happy about it because it is a nice house. Now, it's a big house, so it probably wouldn't be used for something like that, but it is possible. One quick story that I will relay. A client that I had that I was designing their house on 40 acres. So the neighbor's house was probably on 40 plus acres and maybe a couple of 100 feet from the property line. The house that I was designing was more than a couple of 100 feet from the property line. So we're talking 300 or 400 feet apart. That property was being used as a short-term rental for executives. It was probably a $8,000 or $9,000 square foot house. $10,000 a weekend, and it was parties and it was loud and it was a lot of music. And ultimately, my clients decided not to build their house because they didn't want to live next door to something like that. They were breaking the CCNR or the laws or the rules of the HOA, but they had no enforcement mechanism to be able to get them to stop. So it does happen. So I am concerned about that. So I think we need to be concerned about our residents that do live in Atascadero, long-term residents that want to stay here, and think about them first. I appreciate the income that short-term rentals bring the owner, and I also appreciate the revenue that it brings to the city, the TOT tax. But I think we need to prioritize what's most important, and quality of life is what's most important, especially for the people that live here. So yes, I am in favor of an ordinance.
Thank you. And I think that's just a key point. We do appreciate the revenue. We appreciate the opportunities it provides for our property owners, but we do have a duty to protect our neighborhoods and our other residents from, objectionable behavior. It does bring me to the question though of how many complaints we do get. And I hope that if, for the folks experience that kind of thing, that you do complain. And I take it that in some of the cities, the STRs are on, let's say, a tighter leash than just an existing homeowner. I mean, if my neighbor's kids are, partying in the pool after the 10 o'clock noise ordinance or the noise ordinance comes more into play, I complain. But if it's a recurring thing with a STR, we could have more severe penalties, could we not?
Yes.
I
you
believe
may.
in San Luis Obispo, because they have the whole college scene, they have a lot of restrictions and fines on parties and that sort of stuff, where tenants end up having to pay substantial fines for, out of control behavior.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah. So, I mean, we could, I mean, it begs the question, or one speaker asked the question, I mean, how many problems do we have, and are we enforcing them? Are we enforcing our existing noise ordinances? But, I always concerned if a neighbor says, well, we called, nobody does anything. That's always an issue of concern, because we'd want to talk about enforcement. I want to kind of go down through some things so we address. One of the key things I'd like to address would be whether or not we want to apply any of this to multifamily. I mean, my own thought again is that this only is existing in 2 multifamily structures in the city. And part of me would say, yeah, we should not allow it in multifamily because that should be for housing. But on the other hand, I don't want to kind of get into over-regulating where some people are renting out their spare room in an apartment or anything. So my own inclination would be to say, we don't need to apply this regulation to multifamily properties because it's just not a problem. But if it became a problem, we always could revisit that. So I want to see how you guys feel about that piece.
That, for me, that falls into the category of not waiting till after the course is gone to shut the barn door. I think that we should go it because since there isn't already a problem, it won't create an issue if we just go ahead and confirm the status quo and not allow this ban it except for owner occupied. An owner occupied thing that should handle. If we have an owner occupied requirement, can we? Does that count if the owner is somewhere on that property? So if they're the other half of the duplex or the triplex and they're renting part of it out or renting a room in one house, either way that would work, right?
To be clear though, when we use the term owner occupied, somebody might be a long-term renter of a property. They might rent a house, and if their landlord allows it, they could rent out a room, I assume. So want to be clear about what we mean by owner occupied. But when you talk about in a duplex, a lot of, times owner rents out both sides of that duplex. Let's say they don't live in either one of them. So I'm not sure where we want to go in that kind of scenario. But my concern on that would be if I rent out one half of a duplex and my half has 2 bedrooms, and I'd like to rent out one of those bedrooms on an Airbnb basis. That has the potential of impacting my neighbors, but it also has potential of substantial income for me. So, but I mean, go ahead and answer the councilman.
There's several different ways this can go. I mean, I think it can be owner occupancy regulated. It could be their primary residence regulated. It could be that there's a primary resident living there long term. So you can specify any of those things, but we always have to keep in mind what can we actually regulate and enforce, and how can we track these things. So that always has to be on the forefront of the mind when you do establish any of these criteria. Primary residence, probably easier for us. Owner occupancy, probably pretty easy to regulate. When you start getting further from that, it becomes challenging. Like how do you verify it? So.
Yeah, I think if you had an either the owner or the primary resident or someone who claims that property as a primary resident being allowed to do that in a multifamily and nobody else, I mean, that seems like that would be pretty easy to tell and, no big deal.
I do feel though, like when it comes to like the single family homes, we have had some issues. So I feel it's a more identifiable problem than the multifamily piece. But where I hear you coming from is that you think we should apply said ordinance, prospective ordinance to multifamily.
Yeah.
Things.
Just not waiting I mean, we can do it now and it's not going to create a big problem.
No, I think we should apply it to multifamily now. I don't think we should wait for problems to arise before we address them. If we open the door too much for multifamily units, apartment buildings is probably my biggest concern. Duplexes, maybe not that big a deal. And if the owner is living in one of the units, then, you know, I'm probably less concerned about that. But if we allow, once the door is open, it's going to be hard to undo that. And if it becomes a problem, it might not be a problem now, but that doesn't mean it's going to be not in the future. And I think it's wise for us to anticipate potential problems in the future and just make sure that we have safeguards in place to not let something like that happen. That could be bad.
Okay, one thing I would want to, in terms of providing guidance for staff on this piece of the issue is, we have, for example, La Plaza here, where, you know, those are technically condos. They're all owned by the overall property owner at this point. They are individually sellable, but they had originally thought they might utilize some, you know, some of them on an Airbnb type basis. And I spoke with Mr. Zappas today about, you know, did you do that? Did it work out? And the answer is yes, they did do it. It wasn't particularly problematic, but it wasn't profitable either. So they now, you know, rent all of those units on a long-term basis. But the question would be, and I think this goes to city manager's experience in Pismo Beach, where, you know, you're looking at the downtown as a different, and mixed use buildings perhaps as a different scenario than just regular apartment buildings. So that if we were going to say, if I'm hearing you say we should not allow short-term rentals in multifamily, I would say that there should be an exception for mixed-use buildings, certainly in the downtown area, because that's more of the kind of place where people might expect to be able to obtain that experience.
And actually, I would agree with that. That's something that I had thought about as well, is downtown is a completely different environment. It's a different zone. People that, and plus the mixed use aspect of it, it is different than just taking up a block of apartments or condos in a large building. So I would agree with that.
And I do think that, you know, since I had asked to, you know, have this on there, the market has changed where, you know, people did experiment with that during pandemic, post-pandemic, and finding that it, in most cases, doesn't pencil out, so that it's not a significant issue in terms of, you know, loss of housing availability. So, but I would suggest that there, you know, that we kind of not include downtown mixed-use buildings in that. So, do you have a thought?
Well, there, get it to work. Yeah, I can work with an excluding downtown from that restriction on multifamily uses. Let mixed use in downtown be available. You know, we need to watch it, and we'll need to make sure that we don't create a situation that has you know, a lot of where we are allowing other problems to develop. But if that's, I think that we should we should go ahead and implement it in other areas at least, and rather than, you know, implementing it nowhere, implementing it outside of downtown would work for me.
Okay, thank you. In terms of so I just don't know that I see anything else relative to the multifamily piece. Then, if you're suggesting we not allow it except in the downtown
Can I
area.
ask a clarification on that, Mayor? The
Yes.
downtown thing's very clear that these would be allowed in downtown. Are you talking about multifamily zones or multifamily structures once built? Because we have some single-family structures in multifamily zones that really aren't different than a single-family home. Under state law, you can have up to 4 units on a single-family home with a JADU and an ADU. Are you saying that that's multifamily then and couldn't be used?
Yeah, I understand. And you and I discussed this morning, because, I mean, from my perspective, if it's a single family, if it's a home on a multifamily zoned lot, to me, it's a home. I mean, yes, it might have an ADU, it might have an attached ADU, et cetera. Just because it happens to be in a multifamily zoned area, for me, is not the driving factor. For me, the driving factor is that it's a home, as opposed to, you know, a whole bunch of, you know, condos or townhomes built into a single structure.
Right. So I want to see what the direction, there's clarity from the council on, it's not so much about the zone as it is if you had 5 or more units on a parcel, that is considered a multifamily structure and couldn't be used for short-term rentals. But below that, you could, and also the downtown. Could I get clarification on that?
I'd like to, defer starting with. Mayor
Yeah,
Pro Tem Daris.
my concern mostly was multifamily structures, so apartments, condos, townhomes and such, yes.
Yeah, likewise, I think the biggest concern is multifamily structures. For the record, I do want to raise one thought, and that's in terms of how we are accommodating the housing needs of our community. We have a lot of situations where you have a single-family residence on a multifamily zoned property. If we have those being taken up to be mini hotels instead of becoming developing out as multifamily housing, we are in the long run limiting that stock. So it may be something we want to reconsider later as we look at where we can accommodate the housing that our RENA numbers require. But let me just ask planning, if we were to allow for short-term rentals to continue in single-family structures that are in multifamily zones, do we have enough multifamily zone land to accommodate our current round of RENA numbers? That's the regional housing needs assessment that Ms. Keene mentioned earlier.
Yes. Now, RENA's going to change. I'm going to have hopefully some preliminary numbers as soon as tomorrow.
Oh.
But for the future, way out, and the other factor to keep in mind is our general plan update, if and once approved, will expand mixed use and multifamily zoning. So yes, short answer is yes.
Okay.
We have
Then-
a lot
then
of
I'm-
additional inventory coming.
Then I'm cool with it.
My concern about the part of your comment is that, I mean, if somebody owns what is a single family structure on a piece of land that happens to be multifamily, or we make it multifamily zoned through the general plan update process, I don't want to treat them differently than somebody, like me that owns, a house on 3 acres farther out. Because I don't want to be in the point of, oh no, we expect you to build ADUs on your property to achieve, a higher housing density. And I don't want to preclude those people from being able to rent out a room, or if they do attach an ADU or a junior ADU, because for some people that's how it's feasible, right? They're going to change a garage into a guest bedroom and maybe rent it out periodically. I don't want to interfere with people's finances to that degree. I'm looking more to protect existing neighbors from problems than I am to try to, force things on somebody just because they happen to live in a multifamily zoned area. But I think the point is we can wait, we don't have to address that in this piece. We can, to answer the city manager's question, say, you can allow this in, mixed use buildings downtown and in single family structures up to 4 dwelling units that happen to be in multifamily zoned.
So Mayor, that just quick clarification, that definition you just mentioned. So as part of this going forward, we would want to define what a multifamily structure is for the purposes of this particular ordinance.
I think you're kind of
5 or more units.
We would expect you to kind of come up with some detail on that.
Okay. And then the other question I had related to this before we move on from mixed use and downtown, we haven't brought up mixed use outside of downtown, mixed use in a commercial zoning district, which we're going to see more of with the new general plan update, is essentially residential over commercial in a commercial district.
Right.
And how would that be treated? Would that be treated the same as an apartment building or the same as mixed use downtown?
My inclination would be to treat it as the same as mixed use downtown, but I'm not sure my colleagues agree with that. So I want to defer.
I think in those situations, the number of units is not going to be large. It's not going to be 20 or 30 units like some of the apartment buildings we have here. So I'm less concerned about something like that in terms of, if you've got 5 or 6 units in a mixed use in a commercial zone, you're not going to get half of them. Well, you can't. We've got, it's 40% max, I think is what it says in the staff report is what we do anyway. So it's not like it's going to be inundated with short-term rentals, just by sheer volume of the units that'd be available, the way I see it.
I think though, like if you give the example, I think of a project on Morrill Road, you could have substantially more than 6 units, for example, right?
Some of these densities are pretty high. Yeah, it could be just like La Plaza in another location.
So it could be fairly substantial in response to what you're kind of,
It could be a 3-story building with multiple units. It
Yeah.
depends on the site. But then again, in that same district, you're also going to allow for hotels and motels potentially. So living in a commercial district comes with a different set of living sort of
Well, I think
qualities.
living next door to a short-term rental is different than, I mean, literally next door, sharing a wall is different than living in a neighborhood where there's a hotel. I mean, I can have a house and the hotel be down the road. That's completely different. So I guess with that being said, we talked about, and I don't want to jump ahead too much on this, but it's at the top here, establishing a citywide cap or distance buffers. And then I think in a situation like that, where maybe there is a substantial number of units in a mixed use, then we would use, we can fine tune this to death, and that's what I don't want to see happen.
Yeah.
But a distance buffer that's used for that situation versus neighborhoods. So units that are more than, you can't be next door, you can't be have clustered or whatever.
I think, go ahead.
Yeah, the thing that I see in this situation, when you've got like a mixed-use unit, you've got a common landlord. And therefore, you've got a much more direct route to accountability. And I would encourage landlords to put some provisions in their leases, or tenants to insist on that. But it certainly it could be. It doesn't have the same problems with no decent enforceability that we have when you've got whole house rentals out in the community. So I'm comfortable with treating mixed use developments in commercial zones in the same way that we treat mixed use developments in the downtown commercial zone.
Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, because I mean, I agree, because part of though is if I go into rent an apartment in a mixed-use building and I'm going to rent an apartment on the 3rd floor, as long as the landlord tells me, hey, some of the units in this building are going to be or may be short-term rentals, well, then I've bought into that, and so that's one of the reasons I don't have a problem with that. So, and I want to preserve that flexibility in terms of those particular property owners and being able to have those options available. Okay, so let's move then to, the big enchilada, which is single family homes being used as STRs. I want to talk first, maybe this will be an easier piece of the puzzle, and that's parking. I would tend to agree, that there should be no street parking. If you're going to use your home to make money, the whole premise is you're trying to minimize the impact on the neighbors. I don't know how hard line I want to be on that. On the other hand, I mean, like where I live, you can have an event and have, I can have 30 cars on my property and it's not going to bother, the cars themselves aren't going to bother the neighbors. They're not anywhere even near the neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
And so I would see that on larger properties, maybe they request a parking number and you look at the property and you give them a number of cars they can house, but it would also be limited to the number of guests, which is predicated on the number of bedrooms or what have you. But I would say in general terms, you shouldn't be putting cars out onto the street, using up parking that by all rights, is there for your neighbors as well. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I would agree. Yeah, I think street parking should not be allowed for those reasons, but also a lot of our streets don't really accommodate too much street parking. I know where I live in particular, it doesn't even allow it. And thankfully, that's one of the things in our HOA that people actually comply with. You know, I mean, the CCNR say, you know, you must park your car in your garage, so you can't park it in the driveway. Well, everybody parks in the driveway, so that you can throw that one out. But nobody parks in the street, and if they did, it would become a problem because they're narrow streets. So yeah, I think saying no to street parking and just blanket covers it for every situation.
Yeah. My inclination would be to go with that, but I would be inclined to allow for a property owner to ask for an exemption on that if they've got a situation where it's perfectly reasonable to have, you know, extra street parking and they can make the case upon licensing that.
Got
You know,
it.
this, I'm assuming that we have some kind of inspection process on licensing. I'd allow that exemption, but if that is too much complexity to be that flexible.
No, and that's what I was going to say. If there's an inspection process, which I believe there should be, I mean, as Mayor Bourbeau mentioned earlier, that really what we're talking about is commercial property, the way it's being done. And there's a lot of things with that I think should be inspected as a commercial element, commercial facility for all kinds of safety reasons and whatnot. But in that case, like anything else, when you apply for your permit to do this, submit with it a site plan that says this is what my property looks like. This is what the street looks like. And if the street happens to be wide enough in front of their house, maybe to accommodate one or two or more parking spaces, they can show that, and that would be the exemption. But they would have to show that the accommodation actually exists. Otherwise, and I think everybody, plus I think having that on record for the city, and again, I don't want to add too much work for staff, but if that something is on record with the permit, that a simple site plan that says this is what my property looks like and here's the parking accommodations, I think that's good to have an actual note of that.
So is that clear enough that basically no on-street parking unless they apply for, justify an exception and you agree?
Yes, what's not clear is how we would do an exception, whether that would be something that we can iron that out later. So we'll bring some ideas.
Yeah, let's circle. I'm assuming that you're going to circle back to some of this and we'll tie up how to do set up the enforcement mechanisms. But in principle,
yes,
there should be a way to do an exception. Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about the real, I guess, kind of the heart of the matter in terms of how much limitation we want to put on the ownership or full-time occupant piece of it, and then ultimately grandfathering. Because I for one, I don't want to pull the rug out from anybody who currently operates one of these. So I believe in grandfathering. It's just a question of date, whether it's today or some other date prior to today, since we began the process and kind of gave people forewarning. And could you clarify for me, I think you had stated at some point in our earlier today talking about this, that there's been 30 applications in the last calendar year or so?
Yes, that's the approximate number and I think it's definitely been an uptick since we've started this conversation, since we've done all the outreach, and that's to be expected. People putting in placeholders.
So you are under the impression that some of those applications are based on people trying to get ahead of of whatever we're going to do.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to clarify that. But I mean, I do believe in grandfathering, certainly, so we don't pull the rug out from somebody who's, kind of done it under existing rules in good faith. But on the other hand, I do still have my underlying concern about, people running basically a commercial lodging establishment in a neighborhood, and that wanting to have some, home ownership or home occupancy going around that. So I would like to see how you guys feel.
I'm inclined to be generous in allowing owner-occupied situations. It helps our residents manage their lives, their property, and it supports ongoing community life. So I don't think, and it takes away 90% of the concerns about externalities, about effects on neighbors, because if the owner is living there on the property, they're the first one to notice the loud drunken party at 3 a.m. in the swimming pool and put the kibosh on it. So I would distinguish that we need to have some more substantial regulations that apply or restrictions that apply to non-owner occupied situations.
Right, but so you're
Yeah,
saying
quest-
basically
yeah.
you would require either owner occupancy or local ownership.
Yeah, the question of local ownership. Yeah, can we distinguish in our policies based on where the owner lives so that we essentially give a benefit to an Atascadero resident someone who lives in the city but doesn't live on that property?
Sure, happy to address this. And I also just want to take a moment to introduce myself to those who don't know me. I'm Taylor Fland. I serve as your assistant city attorney. So you'll see me at planning commission meetings, but Dave, our city attorney, is absent today. So that's why I get to be here.
Thank you for that. I meant to ask you that.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then on to the question. So you asked whether there would be you could have a requirement that the owner of the short-term rental be a Atascadero resident. Is that correct?
Can we treat properties where they are owned by an Atascadero resident who isn't living on that property differently from properties that are owned by someone who does not live in Atascadero?
I think that would be run into some issues related to the Dormant Commerce Clause, kind of not a very well-known piece of the Constitution, but pertains to disruption of interstate commerce. So you would need to be able to you need to be able to justify your reason for doing so. Typically what we see in these situations is either just a blanket owner occupancy requirement or this local contact requirement, both of which address health and safety concerns. Whether you could tie a resident ownership to a health and safety benefit, I think would be a bigger question that would require some more research.
Yeah, I think we could end up creating some really complicated problems if we did something that treats local non-resident owners, whereas if this is somebody's primary residence, whether they own it or live in it, that's a pretty clear thing, and that's where you don't need a local contact if somebody is living on the property. If they're not living on the property, you need a local contact, a 24-hour contact.
Yeah, that begs. I mean, essentially, that is the issue, though. Is are you requiring owner occupancy, or just a local contact? Because if you're just requiring a local contact, then you're saying the house can be strictly used for short-term rentals and is not part of the housing stock.
But in order to have a 24-hour contact, I mean, I don't know if any of the property management companies, I don't know if any of them have ever used one, if they have a 24-hour hotline for something that comes up. Otherwise, then the owner would need to be contacted and be able to make their way to the property if needed within a certain amount of time. I think it's in the staff report as a recommendation, or it was at least mentioned somewhere. I think the 24-hour contact is important. And if that means that the owner must reside in the county and not beyond, then I'm okay with that. Question that I have, and this is kind of related to it, are junior ADUs allowed to be used as short-term rentals?
No, they are not.
They're not. So it's the same thing as ADUs, they just can't be. Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
And then I just want to add the clarification. I think I heard you say something about requiring the owner be a county resident or a local resident of some kind in order to operate the STRs. That is where we get into some issues with justifying that particular regulation on constitutional standards, whether we can justify the owner's proximity to the property as a meaningful regulation in terms of interstate commerce. Usually that is addressed by a local contact, which is a less burdensome requirement, if that makes sense. Happy to elaborate.
Kind of. So, I actually kind of confused me. So, I understand if you live near the county line and the owner lives 20 miles away, but in a different county, then that sort of kind of messes everything up. So instead of saying that they must live in Atascadero or in the county, can we give it a radius and say that they must live, I mean, they're, wherever they are, if they're going to be the 24-hour contact, they must be no further than whatever miles.
What you usually do, yeah, but I think the easier thing is to say you must have a contact respond by, because the key enforcement to this thing is the neighbor's observation, right? So if something's really happening next door and you have a guide or good neighbor, most of the people who rent these are going to be fine, right? And so it's about the couple that violate the privilege of the rule. So I think that's why the good neighbor policies and brochures are good, because when a license is issued, it's easy for us to execute sending a brochure to each of the neighbors. And the cost of that is paid for by the permit, issuance. And so there's a number there they can call. And when you have a complaint, a person has to respond within 30 minutes is usually reasonable. So it doesn't matter where they live. They just need to be there in 30 minutes, and the neighbor needs to know that they address the issue in 30 minutes. And if they don't, then they could file a concern or complaint. If you get too many of those, you lose your privilege of, using the house.
Right.
And
But I mean, so
I just want to distinguish between requiring that the owner of the property that operates an STR live in the county versus a local contact be in county. The local contact being in county has a kind of clear justification in relationship to health and safety. Having the actual owner of the property be a county resident is where the more tenuous connection.
They're trying, there's two policy objectives the council is trying to consider, right? One is the health and safety of a response for quality of life in the neighborhood. So that's the person that's for the person that responds within a half hour. The other issue is housing stock, right? So if you grandfather in people who've bought these as investments that don't live there, they have a manager, they have a person that will respond. That's just an investment opportunity. If you grandfather them in or you don't, that's up to the council. Then going forward after that date, are these owner occupied or not? Because that's about protecting housing stock, right? That doesn't have to do with the other item. You've addressed that differently. So that's where I think staff needs to kind of hear from you on that.
Right. I mean, that's the key point is either you require owner occupancy. If you don't require owner occupancy, it doesn't matter if the person lives in Montana or they live down the street, because they're going to pay somebody to be the 24-hour local. They can just pay somebody 24-hour local contact, and you can't require them to live in Atascadero, but you can require them to live on the property. That's the bottom line. So it's either it's owner occupied, or it's just, you're paying an extra fee for your property manager to be available in the middle of the night at 2 a.m, to run over and chew out the guests for screaming in the pool. And so the real issue here is, do we require owner occupancy? Now, what does that mean? If you require owner occupancy, then it becomes difficult to rent out the whole house unless, you're living in the ADU.
No, so what owner occupancy
can
is,
can
one of
rent
the
out an
things
ADU if you
we've
go
done that
before
worked
20.
in court, and because we actually had a lawsuit that this firm defended for down in my other city. And so usually if it's your primary home that you live in for 6 months plus a day a year, so you can go on vacations and rent it out as long as you have the contact, but it still is a housing unit for you. It's your primary home. And when you go to pick up your permit, you show proof of homesteading on your property tax. That's easy to do. And you show one or two other documents, your voter registration, your ID. There's other things you can show, and that's kind of it. And then it's your word. And believe me, neighbors watch, and they'll watch. They know if you live there or not. And we actually had neighbors keep track of a calendar, and they actually X'd how many days the person was there or not through photography, and that was upheld in court, that the person was not their primary residence, and they were fined thousands of dollars. So there are ways to do it that way. I think the question is, do you need to have a home stay where someone's always living there, which is more strict than an owner-occupied home, which means you're there 6 months and a day, or it's an investment property? That's usually
Right. And there are people who, they live there, but they leave a lot on weekends and they want to rent it out. I don't know, I don't have a problem with that. It is their home. And as long as they are providing an alternate point of contact when they're out of town, I can live with that. I mean, because it's still a house, it's still a home for Atascadero residents, and they have the opportunity to make some money. But
I'm
the
fine with that
question
too.
again boils back to, so for new folks, because we grandfather in the existing people. For new folks, do we say, no, you need to be the primary resident of the property if you're going to rent it out as an STR? That's really the key question of this entire exercise. And so that's kind of what, I think we need to weigh in on for staff.
Yeah, and when we discussed this before, there was a lot of concern out in the community that we were nipping something in the bud that would be useful to the community, and we've had people ask for some opportunity to continue doing this. I think if we allow for some of that, we do need to have restrictions on the number and proximity of those. A limited number, we could consider allowing a limited number of licenses and allow them within a certain proximity. We have to have good solid policies about our neighbor communications and all of that, because it does create more risks when the whole home is being rented out.
So you're saying we'd need to go down that road if we allowed non-owner occupied ones?
Yeah. If we go down non-owner occupied, then we need to have some strict limits on how many, because that it is eating away at our housing stock. It has the potential to change the quality of life and the character of communities if you have very much of this.
I kind of learned, that, the market has changed. There's probably not as much demand for this as there was when we first talked about it. But I have wanted to avoid what I've seen these other cities go through, these painful machinations of how many and how far apart and all this kind of stuff. And that's why, for me, the simpler answer was to say, no, it needs to be owner occupied. It needs to be your home. You can leave for the weekend, that's fine, but it needs to be your home. And in that way, it's still a home for Atascadero residents, but they are allowed, they can make money on it by renting out a room or the entire house if they choose to do so. I'd like to have minimal regulation as much as possible. So I kind of wanted to stay away from the how many and the how distance sort of a situation.
Although
I have anyway.
Yeah, although a strict owner occupancy requirement is a less complex but much stricter regulation, in the sense it does not allow any of that.
I do. I understand that.
That some residents want and some residents do not.
I understand. Mayor Pro Tem Barry's comment on that?
This is a complicated one.
This is the issue.
Yeah, well, the way you described the owner occupancy and the way the city manager did as well, I mean, I can see how that, well, basically what that does is it's not going to be an Airbnb, all year long. It's just occasionally, and at least less than half the year anyway. So I think with that being said, I think the owner occupancy is a good method, is a good way to go about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so if the other two of you want to go with an owner occupancy requirement, then I'm comfortable with doing that for now. Knowing that we can revisit that and open it up later if we decide that adding additional units beyond whatever we're grandfathering in is something that we would like to do and make available as an investment opportunity for folks.
Yeah, so just for clarification, and so what this is saying then is somebody can't own a house, live somewhere else, and then have that house be strictly used as an STR. That's what we're, okay, because I want to make sure I understand that, because if that's still going to be allowed, where if a single family residence can be used anytime during the year, then there needs to be a distance between the next one.
No, if we say it has to be owner occupied, then essentially they either, they've got to own it, they've got to live there most of the time.
Okay.
They would be able to rent it out on, whenever, they'd be able to rent it out when they're not there.
Right.
They'd still have to comply then if they're not, if they go out of town for the weekend, they'd still have to comply with the points of 24-hour point of contact.
Sure.
But it would be to say, no, you can't take a house and turn it into a hotel.
Right. Okay. Okay. And that, I'm good with that.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I do think that we should allow, as I was asking earlier, that staff thought we could do, allow a way for an exception to that in situations where, say, if the primary resident's going to be away because they're often, in a rehab facility or someplace else, or you have an estate situation.
I understand.
this is with seniors, this is
Right, but I mean.
These
you-
things can get
somebody could be
complicated.
on
and all.
sabbatical or whatever, and I think staff can come up with some things that say, there may be exceptions to this rule.
Yeah, so to allow,
Yes.
if where it's functioning as in spirit, this is a primary residence, even if it does not meeting the technical requirements
mean,
because of some
If I'm
situation. And
Employed overseas for
Yeah.
a year.
yeah,
Yes, and if I can still clarify too, what we're talking about here is the definition of primary residence, not owner occupied. There's two different
Understand.
things. They're kind of synonymous, but really primary residence means that that person could be gone for 4 months.
Right.
But it's their primary residence on the tax rolls.
And also, so somebody could have a property that has a large house, or a larger house, 2,500, 3,000 square feet, whatever, and an ADU on the property, and the owners live in the ADU but can rent the house. So in that case, that's owner occupied. Is that still under, does that still fall in that definition?
Well, if you want it to. So it could be two different definitions, or it could be one definition that has different clarifications. For example, owner resides on the property or it's within the owner's primary residence.
Okay, because in that situation, if the owners live in the ADU and they're renting the big house out, then that large single-family residence can be then rented year-round as a short-term rental because they live on the property in the ADU. Technically, I mean,
Yeah.
even if they're off 6 months out of the year or 4 months out of the year somewhere else. So
If that's what you wanted to do, that would address both your policy objectives. Because the two things you're trying to do is on a parcel, you're trying to maintain that as a residential parcel, right? So if someone lives in the ADU or the big house, they still live on the parcel. So that's
Right.
addressing that.
Right.
The second part is when the person comes home from their 4-month trip to Europe, their neighbors will contact them if they didn't have good renters. There's a peer pressure there, which is part of the citizen enforcement of this thing that protects your neighborhoods.
And to be clear, that you could do that if the ADU was built before 2020. Because under state law, you can't turn the ADU into an STR if it was built after
yeah,
20.
but not the ADU, but they can live in the ADU and rent the main house out.
Right, okay.
Yeah. At any time the ADU was
But I
built.
mean, true, but in terms of living in the main house, renting out the
Right.
ADU, it would have to be built after 2020, correct? Good.
Right.
Okay.
And that would give the owner of that property, the flexibility to rent it out, even so that if they don't want to deal with the challenges of potentially evicting a long-term tenant or dealing with that, they would be able to, they live on the property, they're invested in the community, then this takes care of those problems. We just still, any way you slice it, we have to require 24-hour local contact. The owner is not going to be tied to that property, even if it's their primary residence or even if that's where they live all the time. They still may be off visiting their grandchildren. Yeah.
But if it's their primary residence, they're going to be a lot more responsive to the neighbors on an ongoing basis.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I
there,
think.
there is some long-term accountability there.
So-
Most of us in the community deeply care about what our neighbors,
Okay.
think about and maintaining good relationships with our
Well,
neighbors.
that's the key
It's not
aspect
universal.
here. We need to give staff a little more guidance and then we can close this out. But in terms of, do we want to require, and it's, there's going to be an application process for this. Do we want to require an inspection? I was interested to note that apparently Paso Robles does not require an inspection. I myself don't want to establish a minimum. That's up to the property owner. Somebody might want to only rent out their property during Cal Poly graduation when they can do it for a lot of money, or Cal Poly open house, or just a few key events. But of course, if we have a substantial fee, that's going to push people towards renting it out more often, right? Because if they're going to have a fee that's like $800, they're like, whoa, I'm going to have to, rent this out a certain minimum number of nights to make it worthwhile. I initially thought, well, inspection makes sense, but if I don't want to impose personally a substantial fee on folks to do this. I want it to be as minimal as possible. My question would be to my colleagues is, do we really need to do an inspection? We don't now. And if some other cities don't require it, what's our, is this again, a solution in search of a problem? I understand the theoretical problem if somebody's renting out an unsafe residence, but if Paso doesn't, require that, and they have a lot more of these, and a lot more active ones, do we really need that? So,
Well, my feeling on that is that, when you build a hotel, as a business, it has to comply with certain codes and regulations and in order for it to function as a hotel. So it's a commercial business. So I think it might be a simple inspection, but I think it needs to be inspected to make sure that safety standards, that it is safe. I mean, if, maybe there's an old furnace in the house that's, got issues and it's just not the structure of the building, there's something about it that's not safe. It just needs to be inspected. I think if you're going to operate this as a business, it needs to be treated as a business as in anything else. So I think inspections are important. The initial application, it needs to be inspected. And then I don't know if it's maybe once a year, every other year, whatever it is. But I think like any other business, it needs to be made sure that it's up to par with codes and safety standards.
Okay, thank you.
My inclination would be to require that for properties that are principal residence but not owner occupied. So if the owner's living there on the property, then they already consider it safe enough for them.
But we
Not necessarily. I mean, some people can live in some pretty squalor
Well, yeah, but
conditions.
they're not going to be able to rent their place out on on
yeah.
Airbnb if their
I
place is
still
a dump.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
there
not
might
gonna
be
assume
self-limiting.
Everybody is as responsible as the three of us sitting up here.
No,
So
I'm not talking about that.
I think inspections are important. I think if it's going to be a business, it needs to be inspected.
Right. I'm just saying if it's a dump, they're not going to last very long in this business.
Right.
They're going to get 1-star ratings and they're going to be.
Well, if we do an inspection, I want it to include elements of not having fire pits and wood burning things out there in high fire risk areas.
Well, I don't know. That's something I think I potentially disagree on. I totally understand the risk, but that's why people rent some of these things, for pools and fire pits, et cetera. And I think you'd have to go more on the side of the good neighbor, what you need to know about, renting a house in Atascadero, and or maybe they got to sign something before they rent it or something,
In terms of the safety stuff, so when you pull a permit to do just about anything, one of the comments that comes back on the drawings is to make sure that you have a smoke alarm in all the sleeping rooms and outside the sleeping rooms, and it's CO2 detectors and all that kind of stuff. Not every house in the Atascadero has that. And again, if it's going to be a rented space, then those things need to be in there. So the initial inspection, the inspector would go in and say, well, you don't have any smoke alarms in here. Okay, now you got to add them. There's your inspection. I mean, I think it's really simple to make sure that some of the simple things, just make sure that they're in there. It might be a very simple inspection, but I think it's very important.
I can live with that, although I'm guessing, I don't know, maybe you do, Mr. Dunsmore, about whether or not some of these platforms require their own inspection or, people to certify that they do have those things, carbon monoxide detectors, because they're concerned about liability as well, I assume.
From what I understand, there's self-certification through these online platforms, and there's nobody that comes out.
Okay. I can live with the inspection requirement, but I want to keep the cost minimal. I think it needs to be an initial inspection. And after that, I don't think we need to require it, certainly not annual. But because we want to try to minimize this fee that, okay, you paid for this up front, you paid for an initial inspection. Now you're good to go. You're just going to do a low key annual renewal fee. And you move on from there. But I don't see re-inspecting, these properties that frequently. We don't have that kind of inspection program for apartments or other things like that, right?
May I suggest, I think where this has worked well, if the question is inspection or not inspection, and if you do have an inspection, it's for life safety issues. They have a fire extinguisher, there's smoke detectors work. Is there a secondary exit from the house? It's not barricaded with an oven or something. Yeah. And usually you check for the number of rooms and the occupancy of the structure and then the on-site parking spaces. So those are the things that are usually looked at for these, and you do it once. And it's a complaint-based system. So if the person receives a violation or complaint, then they're subject to inspection again. If they operate well and have no complaints, and they're not inspected again.
Right. And egress out of the bedrooms is, that's a code. You can't build a house unless you have egress out of the room. So you can't, the windows might be adequate for code, but what's right outside that window? You can't jump out the window and, I don't know, fall into a rose bush or something. I'm sure that's not going to be a safe way to exit a house if needed. So again, I'm going to say it again, inspection is important
Okay.
because it's a safety thing.
So you have an initial inspection for life and safety issues, but while you're doing it, you're going to determine the number of parking spaces that could be allowed, the number of guests, the maximum number of guests permitted, whatever. You might as well address that if you're going to be there visiting the property, I guess. But I would want it, the inspection be one-time initial, and then, and you guys can flesh out some of the things, because we're going to have a whole nother bite. We'll be here till midnight if we get into too much detail on all these. I do think we want to address noise in terms of, do we want higher standards of enforcement for this than just regular homeowners? And you also need to address the penalty piece of this for failure to comply. It needs to be much more substantial than a regular $100, code enforcement violation, sort of thing. I think you guys agree with that. We'll let staff flesh that out.
Yes, it needs to be a substantial thing. I think that the requirements are can be more significant for this in terms of stricter noise requirements, because it is a privilege to use your property in this way, and it does impose some challenges on the neighbors to have that house occupied by people who are always going to be on vacation.
And I think we can agree that there should be notice to neighbors, and there should be a good neighbor brochure.
Yes.
That sort of thing. And we, the city will have a third-party consultant to help us pursue compliance with this. I think that's good.
Yeah.
So the key, I think the remaining key thing that we need to address is, I guess we don't have to specify, because we could address it when it comes back as an ordinance, but we need to give thought to how far back we want to grandfather. Did we grandfather anybody who's got a, permitted as of today, or some other time, or do we just want to address that when you bring back an ordinance?
Staff can address that when we bring that back, and we can come back with a couple different options.
I think though we're forewarning people that it could be as of today, or even as of when the draft ordinance was introduced. And from legal counsel, we can do that, the grandfathering to a retroactive date, where we're going to say you don't have to have owner occupancy if you already have an existing permit.
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Well, so if we're going forward, we're saying bring back an ordinance that includes like an owner occupancy requirement, or a primary residence requirement, but we're not going to apply that to people with current permits. People are grandfathered in if they had a permit in place as of today, as of August 19th, 2025, or as of October 2024, when we first discussed this. We can do grandfathering, but can we pick a retroactive date to which we say you must have had a permit in place prior to this date?
Yes, you could choose a date. If you're choosing a date in the past, you would want to allow some time to come into compliance for those that do not if I'm understanding you correctly, for those that are, say you chose, I don't know, January 1st of 2025, just to make it easy, you would want as your cutoff, if you had a permit before that time, those that got permits between January 1 and whenever this ordinance comes forward, you would likely want to have kind of an amortization period to allow them to come into compliance.
All right, because myself, I could live with today, kind of forewarning people that when the ordinance comes back, it's going to have this requirement. So, so we don't have 100 people coming in the next week trying to.
You could do that. You could also do, say, you choose today, and those that get their permits in between now and whenever this comes back to you, the next year of permitting, they are required to, they could fill out the rest of their year of their permit, if it's a year-long permit, and then they would have to come into compliance and get a permit in accordance with the new regulations the following year.
For those, okay, but if you've been running one of these since 2019, we're not applying this requirement to you.
And that's something you could do, yes.
Sure. We're not going to pull the rug out from an existing operator.
Yeah, typically the cleanest way to do it would be that any permits obtained prior to the effective date of the ordinance are grandfathered. But if you wanted a period of time in between then that you want those permits to get into compliance, then you would typically have an amount of time that lets them
Okay.
come into compliance.
I think we can wait till you bring back the ordinance, but kind of fair warn people that it could be, not the date of the ordinance. It could be earlier than the date of the ordinance.
Right. I think the thing to be clear is that if we're in consensus on this, if we're applying an owner occupancy requirement for future permits, that it has to be owner occupied or primary residence as of today. Don't go out there and buy a new place and think you're going to be able to shove it in under the door.
Okay.
So that warns people not to make an investment if they're counting on using it in a way that will not be allowed in the future based on the best available projection that we have now, so that we're fair to people.
Got it. I can live with that view. Okay. All right. Is that clear guidance then? Okay. All right. I think we are done unless there's
No,
another issue. What else?
I'm
do you
not
have?
done. Fire safety.
I have one quick question that's on this page. I was going to ask it earlier. Why use a third-party consultant to collect TOT? What's the purpose of that? And what does it cost the city? I mean, what is to do that?
Let me defer that to the finance director. She can probably more eloquently answer that question. Thank you, Jerry. Hopefully I'll help you.
A number of benefits to that. So it provides an online reporting so people can report from home, online, pay with credit card, pay with a check, either that makes them comfortable. Certainly, they're still welcome to mail it in or bring it into City Hall. We welcome payment any way we can get it. But it does offer a convenience for them that they had asked for prior to getting that. And it saves a lot of staff time for city staff.
Okay, so it's easier for the homeowner and it's easier for staff.
Correct.
Best answer ever. All right, thank you.
Ryan,
Okay.
an expert.
Two things. One's easy, and that's I would like the staff to come back to us with an option for having the, in principle, the costs of third-party monitoring for noncompliance with licensing to be paid for by those who are noncompliant with their licensing. In addition
We would
to,
likely do that. We don't have, as you know, a lot of staff sitting around here to do inspections and enforcement
No.
and licensing. And
We
this is
don't.
all going to be largely consultant supported. And that cost will need to be borne through the permit. I hear the cost sensitivity of the council, but if there's regulations and desires, that's expensive. I mean, and so we'll show you that cost and what each component costs.
right.
Decide if you still want that in your ordinance.
Right. So my point is most of these regulations will be borne by the people who are going to profit from using their properties as short-term rentals, and share that with the city through the TOT. I want to see about the cost of monitoring the SB 346 monitoring or whatever, that is watching the listings for properties that are not properly licensed and aren't paying their TOT, but are selling, out as short-term rentals. That those are the folks that ought to be paying the cost of that program, and just like we do for weed abatement. Think about coming back with some kind of structure like that. I at least want to see that proposal come back to us. It may or may not prove workable, but that's what I'd like to see.
I don't have a problem with, asking you to address that. The problem, of course, is, if you have a certain amount of cost, if you're dependent then on having a certain number of violators to pay for it, it's kind of like weed abatement. We hope there's no violators, in which case we have to suck up the cost of Chief Lonson's time to go out and look at all the properties and all that. You know what I mean? So yeah, we want it, the violators to pay, but they may or may not pay the whole cost of the program if there's not enough violators. So,
Right, so-
you don't, it kind of is at cross purposes in a sense. But yes, I think I would like staff to address how we try to see to it that the violators pay for the cost of administrative program.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. You have
Yeah,
one other?
And then the other issue is the fire safety, which I have raised repeatedly from the dais, and we heard from folks here tonight. I don't think I come out of the healthcare environment in hospital administration. There are certain things that are called never events. It's, you shouldn't go to the hospital and have them
for an amputation, had them cut off the wrong leg. Okay? Never should happen. It does occasionally. You don't have to have data that it happens frequently at your hospital to know that you have to design your system so it never happens. Okay, and the risk that the predictable increase in the risk that somebody who is not as aware of this community, who is going to be on vacation, definitionally, and who may be several drinks into that vacation, that this person is going to be more likely to do something stupid that would ignite a fire that could travel elsewhere and damage other properties. And the never event is somebody comes in here and is having a great party and burns down the community. Okay, never, we don't want that ever to happen. We need to address the fact that we are allowing some increase in risk by having people doing short-term rentals. We've addressed some of it because of the owner occupancy requirement or the owner occupancy or primary residence requirement. But I do still think it is wise for us to look at what communities with lots of fire risk also do. That includes places like Placer County, where they don't allow fire pits and those kinds of things, or Santa Rosa area, Sonoma. So we don't have to.
I understand. I don't mind staff taking a look at that, but the thing is, I mean, part of that needs to be, does anybody else do that? Because I'm concerned about how you implement that, because you're not, I mean, stupid people are going to do stupid things, and you can write all the rules you want. And if, like saying, oh, you can't have, a fire pit at an STR, well, somebody's going to do it anyway.
Well,
and,
yeah.
and you're not, I mean, unless you don't want the neighbors peeking over the fence and calling it in, which they could.
Well, just like
I
the
just
neighbors
don't know
will
how
call.
viable that is in terms of workability. And I don't know if staff has a comment or just want to think about that when you bring back an ordinance, check with other cities, see if there's anybody has a viable way of doing that.
If I can
Yeah.
comment on that, again, I think this goes back to the safety inspection. So let's talk about the scenario of a fire pit that's already existing in a house, been there for 20 years or more. Okay, where is it located? Is it right underneath the big oak tree that grew and now it's just a tinderbox waiting to go off? Okay, so maybe that fire pit shouldn't be there in the first place. I don't, it's stuff like that. That's the safety inspection. If you see something like that, it's like, well, that's to me would be a normal thing that the fire chief hopefully would, if he saw that, that fire pit probably shouldn't be there. That's just a big giant fire just waiting to happen, even by regular homeowners. So I agree with you in that sense, but you're not going to go around and inspect every single house in Atascadero for stuff like that. I've got a big sycamore tree in my backyard, and I'm afraid to have a fire pit because that thing will probably go up in a heartbeat if embers went up into it. But in this situation, again, we're treating this as a business, as a commercial sort of aspect. So I think among the safety inspection items that they would look at, they would look and see, is it safe to have a fire pit in any particular backyard? And let's not wait for the fire to happen before we go, okay, we should probably start regulating that.
Right.
So I agree with that.
On the other hand, you're not going to stop somebody who isn't thinking well straight, clearly, from lighting their barbecue with a rolled up newspaper and having it go off into the weeds. Because you may go, oh, the fire pit's in a great place. That's perfectly okay. Somebody can still do something stupid. But I just saying, yes, go ahead and address it. But I would like you to address whether or not you see that in any other city's ordinances, right? Is it is it a practical thing to try to do? I understand the need or the desire, certainly. So is that good? I mean,
Yeah, that'll work. And I think the places I've seen, be sure you look at the high fire risk communities, not just, we have more fire risk here in Atascadero than most of our neighbors. So our county is not a good model for that. But places like Santa Rosa and Placer County up in Lake Tahoe area, some of those areas where fire risk is a significant concern, would be maybe useful models for us. I'm sure there are probably some others. And yeah, it should be in both. you set some rules. There will be people who violate them anyway, but we just did that with the fireworks ordinance. We know that there'll be some people who will say, make rude hand gestures and do things anyway. And there's an opportunity for neighbors to notice that, to call it in, and to bring useful enforcement to stop behavior that is dangerous.
Okay, so staff, is that all good enough guidance for you to move forward?
Plenty of guidance.
Okay.
I think I'd like to just touch on one sort of process component, though. And I just want to understand if council expects us to bring back a sort of draft framework before going back to planning commission and then back to council for final ordinance, or do you feel like you have a good enough handle on this where we go through the planning commission to make a recommendation? And so it sounds like we want to bring some framework back, of what I'm hearing from the city manager at this point.
I'm gonna
And
defer-
because there's still some nuances to iron out.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to your guys, your city manager, and your judgment.
Yeah, we're not taking this to the planning commission. You may have a council member requalified, so this will
Right,
come back.
Exactly. And if we have I'd very much would like the other council members to be able to participate. And so, yeah, I think coming back here first makes sense.
And
I
timing
don't-
wise, our big priority is general plan and zoning code. So this may not come back till end of summer.
Understand.
September. Okay.
I mean, I figured it would be at least 4 months, let's say.
Thank
but
you.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to be very clear about the grandfathering issue, because I don't want people to rush out and buy up properties in this community and gobble up the housing stock in the anticipation that they can get in under the wire and do a commercial business in that residential zone.
Right. Okay. All right. With that, we are concluded on this item, and other council members can rejoin us. We're going to take a break so they have an opportunity to come up, and also we've been up here a long time, so let's take a break. It's 8:41. Let's reconvene at 8:50. All right, folks, it's 8:50. We said we would reconvene then. Actually, it's 8:49. I'm getting ahead of myself. So, well, now it's 8:50. Everybody taking their seats. Like to start on time. Okay, we're going to proceed to our next item, which is a discussion of, I know it's about the slow cog half-cent sales tax expenditure plan. So we're going to turn that over to either Mr. DeBar or Mr. Ryan Betts to present. And I see we have representatives of slow cog here in the audience. I don't know if they're going to present or just available to answer questions. And I thank them for sitting through our long discussion of the prior item.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Ryan Betts, Public Works Analyst, and I will hit the highlights, knowing we had a long item before us, and we do have members of SlowCog with us. Annie Bowski, who was here back in January, will also present some of the items tonight. Let me back up.
To be clear, though, we have seen the expenditure plan before, so I'd like you to highlight any changes from what we heard in the prior meeting.
Absolutely. That's our strategy tonight. So the item before you is the San Luis Obispo Council Government's final transportation expenditure plan for a potential transportation sales tax measure. The emphasis is on final. January 13th, this draft expenditure plan was presented, and our city council went through that with a fine-tuned comb and provided valuable input. And I can honestly attest, as I talked to my colleagues in other cities and the county, this council took that very serious and provided a lot of input, and I'm happy to share that that input made it into the final. Just a quick overview. The San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, otherwise known locally as SlowCog, is our regional agency that focuses on allocated federal and state funds for transportation purposes on a regional and local level. They also provide public transit services on highways and roadway improvements. And finally, they prepare the regional housing needs allocation and the sustainability community strategy. By and large, they are an agency that looks out for the regional approach for the San Luis County. Representatives of each of the city councils share on that SlowCog board, including Councilmember Newsom. This item has really gained some speed since last summer. I want to be clear tonight, this is reviewing the final transportation expenditure plan. It is not putting any type of potential sales tax measure on the ballot. It's focusing really on should that become a reality, and should it be approved by the voters, the transportation expenditure plan will be the guiding document on how those funds are spent. As proposed, it's a half-cent countywide transportation ballot that's, again, potentially proposed for the November 2026 election. As I reiterated in January, council provided really helpful and insightful input on that expenditure plan. All that input, and together with the other 6 cities, the county, and several or many of the community service districts, all came together, and SLOCOG put that plan together as part of the final transportation expenditure plan. That was approved at the SLOCOG board level on February 4th. And now we're at this point where SLOCOG will now present that final transportation expenditure plan back to the cities, and we'll go over next steps, and ultimately to the county and the board on April 1st. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Annie Bowski with SLOCOG.
And good evening, Council. Thank you so much for having us back. And I promise I will go through this rather quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. Just starting off, thank you so much, Ryan, for the great introduction. And just sharing this slide, I know many of you have seen this before, but basically this is the reason we're all here today. So at this point, 89% of Californians in 25 counties have approved a voter approved transportation tax, which means they're collecting a portion of funds and putting that toward road improvements and safety improvements throughout the county. And just a quick look at our neighbors, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and Santa Barbara. Since a couple of these locations put their transportation tax in 2016, and Santa Barbara actually did it in 2008. But since 2016, they literally collected hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's not just the money collected at the county level, it's additionally the funds that can be leveraged back from the state and federal government. So SLO County has collected none of these funds, which is why we continue to be left behind. We went out for a transportation tax back in 2016, but lost by about 400 votes, and have also lost out on quite a bit of funding since that did not pass. And once again, this is the reason why we're all here today, looking for a ballot to place a measure on the November 2026 ballot. And this is just a breakdown. As Ryan mentioned, the SLOCOG board approved the expenditure plan at the February 4th meeting. And you guys saw this last time, but just to reiterate, a half-cent for every dollar sales tax would generate about $35 million per year throughout the county. And we've broken that down into 4 different elements. A 55% would be for road and safety improvements. And this portion of the funding would be broken down into the 8 jurisdictions. And basically that would add up to about $2 million per year for Atascadero. And then additionally, there is a 40% for regional corridor improvements, which would bring almost $5 million a year to the North County region, along with a portion for mobility improvements and then an administrative fee. And basically, when we were here last time, the council was very generous with their time and very generous with their feedback. And we definitely heard you guys and made some improvements based on that. Starting off, this was actually just more of a general FYI, but one of the decisions that, or the edits that was made on the final draft was that the Board of Supervisors decided to break their portion, which is $8.4 million of funding, break it down based on population of the 5 supervisorial districts. So this in no way affects cities, but it's just one of the major changes that people were discussing as something that is different from the original plan. And of course, last time as well, Atascadero does have their own measure, their own general fund transportation measure. And it was asked if the a Citizens Oversight Committee for Atascadero could actually take the place of the Citizens Oversight Committee that would be for this new proposed slow cog measure. And just an FYI that it is best practice to have a separate citizens committee to oversee this information. And it also gives the unincorporated area a voice. So just a follow up on that comment from last time. And additionally, in section 5 is the measure of effort clause. And basically what this does is it ensures jurisdictions would only be tracked on a baseline state sales tax that comes back to cities, and it isn't the general fund or any other revenue sources. And this also changed from a 3-year average to a 5-year average. These are just some quick kind of language and timing updates that we made based on other jurisdictional feedback. And the, let's see, item I in section 6, this was definitely some follow-up after the last meeting as well. And from the January 13th meeting, it was noted that there would be a presentation twice a year to council. So we actually changed this to twice per programming year. So basically averages out to once per year, just to increase the efficiency on reporting a bit more as requested by council at the January 13th meeting. And then this, again, was feedback from the January 13th meeting. A request from council was to trim down the reporting to increase efficiency. So SLOCOG looked into removing this element, but after discussion with the SLOCOG board, it was decided to reduce the reporting time from every 3 years to every 5 years. So it took down the need to report a little bit on this one. And as mentioned last time, we want to show we are delivering on what was promised while making reporting streamlined, similar to SB1, and also similar to how cities report on their general fund measures. Additionally, this is just kind of what's next if a measure were to pass. So the expenditure plan is kind of the framework for what would then become the implementation guidelines. And basically what these would do would dive down a bit more into kind of the official reporting processes and everything that would go into tracking the funds of how a measure would be spent. Nothing would change from the expenditure plan. It would just be a bit of a deeper dive, and SLOCOG would facilitate this process along with feedback from all jurisdictions. And of course, we are here today to ask for approval on the final expenditure plan. We'll then take that back to the SLOCOG board at the April 1st meeting. And that would be, at that time, they would consider adoption of an ordinance with measure materials and request for a ballot, which would be November 3rd, 2026. Just a quick look once again at what this measure would do for Atascadero and North County, approximately bring in a little over $2 million a year strictly to Atascadero. That would be funds that would be decided on by the city as long as it was transportation related. And then bring in an additional almost $5 million a year for regional corridor improvements within the North County, greater ability to leverage grants at the federal and state level, and then additional improvements for mobility for seniors, people with disabilities, and veterans. And happy to answer any questions and dive a little deeper if you guys have any additional thoughts as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from staff, our staff? Okay, I have a question and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. A procedural question. Could you go back to the slide that reflected the dates that says, that one right there? So we're here, in the yellow highlighted, and in the different cities, they're doing it tonight or next week or whatever, whenever they meet. And it says the county consider approval of the plan. Then, on here, it says SLOCOG board, April 1st, do it, and then it jumps to election. In our staff report, it says it mentions the April 1st thing, but then it says TBD, to be determined, 2026 Board of Supervisors consider placement of a transportation sales tax measure on the ballot. What I'm trying to understand, because I've heard different things about this, in this yellow highlighted bullet where cities and county consider approval of the plan. So the county has to look at and approve the plan just like us as a city, which I assume they can do on a 3-2 vote. But in our staff report, it mentions to be determined, the Board of Supervisors essentially considering placement of it on the ballot. So after the SLOCOG board approves, it's got to go back to the supervisors, I think, and that's missing from this slide. And I've heard from different people who seem like they should know that that could require a 4/5 vote by the Board of Supervisors to actually place it on the ballot. So is that correct? And that TBD would be after April 1st then, after the SLOCOG board gives final approval?
Yes, then we would then draft a letter to the Board of Supervisors. And at that point, they would have to vote on it and just, would it be a 5 or? It would be, yeah, thank you. It would be a 3-5 vote by the Board of Supervisors, majority vote.
To put it on the ballot?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. That's good to know about the process then. And so that would be sometime after April 1st.
Yes.
Gotcha.
We would draft a letter and send it to the Board of Supervisors, and then that would be on their agenda for approval.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you. I'll start on my left with Councilmember Beacon, and we'll have a chance, of course, comment on this. So, and we did hear it. So, just questions at this time, if you would.
It's been so long since I spoke, and I see if I can.
Excuse me. Special projects. When I think of like raising taxes, which is what we're proposing to raise taxes. City funds are $2 million a year, projected $2 million a year, and then the other for the corridor. At what point does the city get to decide what the corridor project is? And that one committee member, how much power do they have? Generally, committee members are people that raise their hand and go, ooh, I want to be involved. And then they're pretty biased. It's one person. You don't have two people. You don't have a both. It's not a balanced approach, in my opinion, when you have one person from one city who's not an elected official kind of serving as an oversight. How much of the oversight committee is formal or informal? And how much do they really have say? And no, Atascadero, we're not doing that. We're going to do this. The rest of us in the committee decided. And then also city funds, the ones that are the $2 million per year. I've heard people throw around, well, that could be used for bridges, widening Santa Rosa, 17 million. I don't know, San Anselmo, I was told like $17 million. So are we going to save money for 9 years and then inflation maybe 11 and then widen the bridge? I'm just thinking consequential changes to town. We'd have to save for a few years, maybe apply for a grant. Nothing's guaranteed, state or federally. So I'm just curious how much we actually get to say where that money is spent. And if we want to do road improvements year after year after year, is there going to be, well, sorry, this year you're going to have to do bike lanes because that's what's popular right now and that's what we all want to do in the committee or in the board or what have you. So and changing the composition of our council might change the wants and needs of the city. So is there a cycle for what we can use the money for where it has to go from category to category? Or can we say every single year we want to repave this part of El Camino, next year we want to repave this part of El Camino, and so forth and so on?
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Are you referring to the regional money?
Both.
Okay, because I mean, the $2 million that comes straight to us is
Yes.
ours to determine, but
Completely ours to determine.
I'll defer to her, but yes, I believe so.
Definitely. So, answering kind of your first question, the $2 million is strictly for Atascadero, and you guys can decide exactly how you want to spend that funding. As far as the regional projects go, the Citizens Oversight Committee would definitely be involved and would be able to make recommendations to the Board of Directors, but it would be the SLOCOG Board of Directors who, of course, you have Councilmember Newsom currently on the board, along with Supervisor Moreno as well. And that, of course, that funding can be applied for larger grants at the state and federal level. And you can also team up with other cities within the region if you'd like as well to kind of build funds to apply for a grant. So basically, there would be potential recommendations from the Citizens Oversight Committee, but it would be the Board of Directors making the final decision on how to spend the funding for the 40% for regional corridor projects. So if you were looking at a larger project, it would definitely take a little bit of time to save up money, but then there's also the grant opportunities as well to leverage more funding. So that's kind of the trade-off of the two.
So I see the biggest need in our North County region being anything having to do with 101. So, and we see in the 15 years I've lived here, the 101 has been worked on and off, repaved, dug up, repaved. You know, things have been improved on the 101 over the years. So beyond Templeton to Atascadero bike lane, beyond regional transportation, beyond, I mean, what is Caltrans not doing that they would do with this money?
So one thing we were advised against is not to specifically discuss projects, but I think definitely city staff might be able to name some projects that could be focused in the Atascadero area with 9 different intersections. I think there's definitely improvements that could be made with this funding. Additionally, there are, we've obviously heard of larger regional projects as well that this funding could go toward. That's very economic focused as well.
Yeah, and I think I'll clarify some responses, Councilmember Peak. To answer your question about the kind of the regional citizen advisory body, of which there'd have to be a member from Atascadero on that. Their purview is primarily looking in the rear view to ensure that the expenditures were spent accordingly on transportation purposes. When I read their purview and talking to staff, it's primarily similar to what we have with our C-Stock committee, where they're not as much an advisory body to the council. They're making sure to the taxpayers that that money was spent exactly for transportation purposes in the jurisdictions that they said they were going to do that. So that's, we asked that from the beginning, how that's going to kind of work. So I hope that helps answer that question. The second thing is the council, certainly on the local level, will have as much purview to how that money is spent on the transportation level. So if council wants to repave El Camino one year and do Santa Rosa another year, the council will have that absolute purview on that local level. When it comes to the regional projects, I foresee this as utilizing already the existing slow cog kind of process for identifying regional transportation plans. In fact, they're going through that right now to update that. That's updated every 4 years. And that is an opportunity where our staff sit on their advisory bodies and work with our staff to present our regional transportation plans based upon long-term projects. Those projects then go into the regional transportation plan, and I could foresee the North County and the Slow Cog Board using that as a guiding principle on where those regional projects go. So there will be opportunities for Paso, Templeton, and Atascadero to include their regional projects, mainly on 101 certainly, but there could be others, into those significant plans. And it'll be up to the Slow Cog Board to determine where that funding is going. And that'll be happening for South County, Central County, and North Coast as well. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
It does. I mean, it answers it enough to where, like, we don't know. It's kind of like the vague answer. I mean, we don't know what the money's going to be spent on down the road, but we're going to collect it. And I think that just finally, my last question is, you know, since we still have half a cent left on our city's threshold, if we wanted to raise taxes ourselves, a half a cent or a quarter or whatever. I'm not proposing we do that today. I'm just saying that once we reach 9.25, this is a half cent on top of that. But what is it? Does this because this is a 30-year tax? It's very sticky. It's like steak prices. It doesn't ever go down. You know, once you raise the price, it is what it is. So does that leave us open to more of these proposed taxes from agencies like SlowCog? Now that what's our new threshold above the 9.25 by doing this?
So we actually got SB 333 passed through Senator Laird. And what that means is we are able to add this additional 0.5% tax strictly for transportation. And that does preserve the city's ability to still reach their tax cap. And so this additional taxation would not be included in the official city count.
But does this open the door for more?
If it did, it would have to go through specific legislation to be passed.
In the state level?
Yes, at the state level. So at the current moment, no, but
are there people pushing for that, like for the future? I mean, there are people already talking about doing that?
not that we're aware of.
No more questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Daris.
Thank you. Actually, this is a perfect slide to have up. The local roads repairs, safety improvements, the Atascadero allocation of 2 million. I understand, well, it was in here that it needs to be used within the fiscal year, or we could apply for a 36-month extension to be able to use that. So that part, I understand it. But then now I read it and it says regional project. So I don't know if it's just a typo or how that is, but I'm sure that's for our allocation. We've got 1 year, or we can apply for 36 months. The 4.9 million, that would be North County. That's us and Paso and whatever, and I don't know where, I guess at the grade level. How long can that money pile up over the years before somebody has to say, oh, you guys got to do it on some improvement somewhere along the corridor?
Yeah, definitely. So the $2 million is strictly delegated for Atascadero, and you guys can just hang on to that. We do want to see, of course, receipts and track what is spent just to ensure it's being spent correctly, but that's not something that we control. That's something that the city of Atascadero controls for the regional projects. Let's see.
Oh, so so the 2 million is, okay, so I guess I am reading that correctly. So that is for regional projects that must be spent within the year.
Yes.
When I was speaking with city manager, I totally misunderstood that. And I thought that was when we got our 2 million, we had to use it within the year or ask for an extension. Okay, so I understand that differently. So now I am curious about that because it is a whole sort of North County wide and not just Atascadero. How long do we all have to come together and say, okay, we're going to spend this money on this portion or of the corridor to be able to, I mean, you got 36 months to be able to do that. It seems like those projects are going to be a lot more than 4 or 5 million.
Yeah, and
I mean, I can maybe answer that too. So a lot of these regional projects, they could be interchange improvements or, could be something on El Camino Real or whatever. And, these are usually driven and recommended, but get included in the regional transportation plan. And then as far as funding, they're not always funded until, they go through a process, usually with the advisory committees to the SlowCog board. So the TTAC, which both Mr. Butts and I sit on, and there's 2 other groups that make recommendations to the SlowCog board on funding different projects. But it's if there's a very large project, let's say 46 in Union Road, and it's going to be $10 to $15 million, they might need a couple years, to store up the amount of money to fund that. They might be also looking at grants. There might be some grant limitations on when they get the grants. They might have to, wait a year or so to get the grants to do it. So I think the idea is, with talking with SlowCog staff, is that they want to be flexible with that as much as possible. So, they just don't want another, I'll just say, a Briscoe Road, that would seem like it was on the books for a long 20 years, I guess. So they really want to see projects happen, and they don't want to see, failure to start these projects. So I think that's the whole intent of this requirement.
I think the confusing thing that's driving these questions, though, is we know that nowadays an interchange project or something bigger like 46 Union Road outside of Paso, these are multi-year, things from inception to completion. So it just seems weird to say it was 24, but even 36 months, they're not going to accumulate the necessary funding and even, getting state matching funds or whatever in 3 years. I mean, that just doesn't happen nowadays. So I don't understand this. What's driving this other than the idea of get moving, do something. We want to see it spent on projects, and that's the underlying thing is we want, and the public wants to see completed projects. But realistically speaking, if we're pursuing, doing something at Santa Rosa or San Anselmo, we know it's not 36 months. It was probably 12 months, and when they built it in the 60s, from idea to completion, that's not the world we live in anymore, unfortunately. So I don't understand. And I think that's kind of what's driving my colleagues' questions is why is this here this way?
And then the entire pot, I mean, is the entire pot going to be directed towards one project, one important project? I mean, you mentioned the one that you mentioned. It's like, well, we've got some interchange issues, some on the 101 that need to be addressed as well. So do we wait for the other projects to get done? Or, I mean, do they all fall in line, or can this 4.9 million be dispersed and say, okay, we're going to save up several pots in order to get it done? But even doing that, as the mayor said, it's going to take many, many years to be able to to build up the equity to be able to do it.
James Worthley, SLOCOG staff. You're right. Some of the large highway projects take a long time to get through. And the 36 months is along the same lines as Mr. Barr just determined, which is a Briscoe Road improvement that lasted 20 years with regional funds sitting there. That we lost out on the cost of inflation of using that $6 million. For what reason? Now, the SLOCOG board will be the ultimate determination of what happens with those funds. And a major project that takes, let's say, 6 years, 8 years, if it's still a major project and it's still moving forward and still progressing, unlike what Briscoe Road did, then the SLOCOG board can extend it for 36 months, once, twice, or more times. If it takes 9 years, you get the extension. It's not just the highways, there are regional corridors though. This city won regional funds for El Camino Real. Now, should that sit for 3 years or 6 years or 9 years for another phase?
Right.
You could ask for it.
Right. Understand. I mean, the other jurisdictions will go, hey, why haven't you fixed, we gave you $1 million to do something in El Camino as a locally controlled project. That should happen fairly quickly. So, okay, got it. Any other questions, Mark? Okay, I have one before I pass it down. In terms of the regional funds, to be realistic, I mean, I love the 55% straight to the cities, totally under our control. The regional projects, to be realistic, we're actually in competition, if you will, to some degree with Paso Robles and with the county in terms of, for Templeton and all the way out to Shandon or what have you. And I think the concern, obviously, as an individual jurisdiction is that over time we get our fair share. But going back to, I think, Councilmember Peak's earlier question, the overall SLOCOG board is going to approve these regional projects. So, Paso Robles has this grand project of, an overpass at 46 and Union Road. And we want to, fix a couple of overpasses here, and maybe the county wants to do something in Templeton or way out in Shandon, on 46. I think the only concern is, and maybe Councilmember Newsom knows this better, but as I've seen the SLOCOG board over years, is they're going to try to balance that out over time, because otherwise, I don't want to sit here year after year and the rest of the SLOCOG board goes, oh no, we're going to put all this regional money towards Union Road and 46, and they do that year after year, and then we never see a share of the regional funds for an overpass in Atascadero. So, I mean, I think undeniably at some point we'll get a little bit in competition with each other, but how do we make sure everybody plays fair in the sandbox?
Definitely. One of the best ways is you can definitely leverage the funding you get from your specific 55% allocation. So building that over the years. Obviously, fixing something in Atascadero would be a lot, say, just theoretically traffic way or another intersection would be a lot less expensive than what would go on Union Road out in Paso Robles. And it's something that we know is important. And you have two representatives on the board of directors who would be able to advocate for the city of Atascadero. And there's also, once again, this is where the oversight committee comes into play because they will be kind of looking on the back end of things on how the money is spent and where projects are getting completed. So, and it also comes to shovel-ready projects. So say if the Union Road project's taking a lot longer to kind of get off the ground, if the Atascadero has something that's ready to go, that project's most likely going to get more priority compared to something out on Union Road. So it's not something, obviously it's all theoretical right now, but it's something that SLOCOG does take seriously and the board does take seriously and wants to
Would-
ensure
would the-
that these projects
Would
are
the regional
fair.
money also kind of gravitate towards those projects that have the greatest chance at getting state or federal matching money? Because that again might favor, a particular project in one jurisdiction over projects in other jurisdictions.
Definitely. And the biggest thing with with potentially this amount of funding coming into the area is that we'll be able to leverage more funds. So say Atascadero has saved up some of their money over the years and there's grant opportunities. SLOCOG's, of course, able to help with kind of applying and looking for those grants and finding the best opportunities. So once again, the grant funding is also a little theoretical as well, but it's about the projects kind of being shovel ready and able to get off the ground.
And I can attest the last 11 years being on the TTEC committee. I mean, this happens all the time. There's projects, they might say, okay, we're going to seed some money from this fund for a grant, leveraging grants, and that they don't get the grant, let's say. So that money goes back in the pot and it gets reallocated to something else. And so there's always money being moved around to different projects, but there is a priority project list, that they've developed, and it's usually based on a criteria of, shovel ready, how, importance and everything else. So kind of weeds out a lot of the projects that maybe don't rise to the top of importance, for congestion or whatever it might be. So, yeah, it seems like every TTAC meeting we're looking at the project list and money's being shifted around just based on status of the project.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Funk.
Sure, just continue on this theme for a second. I do want to make sure that I got this, that if we have a project that takes as long to get all of the funding together as, say, the 101 improvements at Pibmo Beach where they're trying to add a lane, I mean, how many years has that been on the books as a priority SOCOG project?
I can, if you want to answer that specifically.
At least probably
But,
7.
Yeah, quite a long time. And the problem is that we didn't have funding to leverage. So obviously if we had funding to leverage, it would have gone a lot quicker. Do you know a specific?
I believe staff started identifying the problem, the slowdowns in the Shell Beach Straits 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the volumes there were higher than they are here. Last 8 years, I think the volumes in North County have reached those levels also. But waiting for state funds to dribble in is what's taken the bulk of the time, 20 years. Having money to leverage grants like the neighboring counties did with their $300 million, leveraging another $600 million, that's how you get projects done faster.
Right, okay. I understood the principle there. My concern is simply that if it takes, we're looking at leveraging maybe matching money or maybe a little better than matching money, given the numbers that you were presenting. So if we've got $5 million a year for North County regional projects, roughly, and it takes $30 million to do one, we're talking about 3 years of getting something to get of all of the money being set aside for that project and trying to get matching grants, which may or may not come together. And, these things may take longer to put together. So do I understand correctly that while the deadline to spend this money is 3 years for regional projects, that 3-year deadline could be then re-upped if the project is active, we're working it, and we're just trying to get all the money together?
Yes, absolutely. So basically, we have that in there, as was referenced, a former project that kind of just sat for a very long time and nothing happened with it. We want to ensure the money is spent appropriately along with the money is spent efficiently. So if it's obviously waiting to be for a grant to come through or something, and the project is actively being looked at and actively being worked on, that's definitely would be consideration for the SLOCOG board to kind of make that extension past the initial 36-month time period. What that does is it just kind of puts in a guideline so people know that they should be able to spend the money in a kind of an efficient way. And obviously it's a tight guideline and we understand that, and these things take a very long time. But we are definitely able to work with each jurisdiction. So we want to be successful and we want you guys to be successful. So that's why we put in the tight guideline, but also have the ability to be flexible with the jurisdictions.
Yeah, so good news, bad news. The bad news is, for the next 3 to 5 years, probably all the North County money is going to go to something on the 101, maybe the 101 and 46 for Paso. And we would be in line later because our next project is probably lower in priority with SLOCOG than that intersection that people are crashing into all the time. The good news would be, as I understand it, that we could use some of our extra $2 million that would be coming to us to do the upfront work and pay for it to get projects shovel ready, so that when that process slows down, we raise our hand and say, we'll take that. We got a shovel ready. Let's go. Am I understanding this correctly?
You explained that better than me. So yes, thank you.
Okay. Very good.
When I, and
When
I might,
go
if
ahead.
I can add, there's a lot of other funding sources that they're allocating right now too. There's, federal and state funding, STIPs and other things. And then we have other funding like USHA and other leveraging monies that we can use towards, these projects. And sometimes, for instance, a good example is our downtown El Camino project. We ended up being short and we got another betterment grant and we were ready to go. And, that we got allocated from something else that wasn't ready to go. And then they made that project whole with some other monies that became available like next year, because that project wasn't fully funded or ready to go.
Okay, so chance favors the prepared mind. Okay, one other question, much less consequential. I'm having some trouble understanding what's the difference between twice yearly and twice per programming year, and how that actually reduces the amount of time. We love your faces, but 3 of you have spent your entire lovely evening here with us, and we do not want you to do that twice a year.
So basically the programming cycle is every 2 years. And when they're going through that cycle, there's a time when they're giving a proposal of a potential budget. So it would be kind of a discussion on how this particular $2 million or potential the funding from the regional projects would be spent. And then that, of course, most likely will come back to council maybe a few weeks or a few months later. And then there would be an additional just kind of reinforcement of that information. So basically we're asking for once per year as opposed to twice per year.
Okay, so may I simply suggest that once per year would be really clear, or twice per 2-year programming cycle? Either one of those would be less confusing than trying to explain that a year is not actually 12 months. A year is 24 months. That'd help me a lot, because what we want to avoid here is the natural tendency of bureaucracies to justify themselves by having to do lots of reporting to everybody. And you guys having to show up twice a year to everything under the sun wastes a lot of money,
that if this thing passes, we want that money to be spent on roads, not CU. Thank you.
Excuse me, may I raise a point of clarification for the council and from SLOCOG? I believe the plan in front of you is the final plan approved by the SLOCOG board. So we aren't at liberty to edit this or change or make suggestions. You had that a month ago. I think tonight's discussion is, does the council support the final plan as it is or not? Is that correct? So I think we aren't in a spot where we can make an amendment to it.
That's the thing. I mean, you're correct in the observation. It's confusing, could be worded better, but we're not in a position to change it at this point. Yeah. Okay.
But just to
Councilmember-
clarify, it does reduce it to an average of once per year versus twice per year.
Right. We understand your answer. It's just kind of poorly worded. So, all right. Thank you. Councilmember Newsom.
I have no questions.
Okay. Yeah, I think I asked mine, and I think I'm good. Let's open this up to the public, and then we'll bring it back for comments by council.
Jeff Oslin. I'm going to start with the positive that this presentation was way better than the one that we sat through before. It's much more organized. Funding's always great. I'm always concerned about, will we have grant money down the line or not? My belief is we passed our sales tax measure here. And because of that, we became a wealthy city in the eyes of grants. So we're not getting a lot of dollars for fire department, police department, because we're self-funding it based on what we did. Now, we probably couldn't afford to do it. You know, it's a catch-22. I don't have a problem with the procedure of this, but my take, and I think a lot of the public's take, is not going to change. We can support the way that this is written and ask them to possibly go forward or not on a sales tax. But let's look at what Caltrans is doing. Nothing. Let's look at what the state's doing, going broke. They want to add a possible mileage tax to your vehicle. I don't see this, and no offense, I served with James on a committee. I don't see this passing the way the state is now. So I still say this to our council. Do we need to support it or do we not? I'm not sure. And I don't see the funds really going to us other than the $2 million, because they're going to work on priorities first. If you look at the James Dean corner, that took years and a lot of pressure by everybody within the county and the state, and funds were retracted and then brought back, and Jordan Cunningham and others really pushed it to get it through to make it a safer corridor. We know what Paso's doing and where the problems are on 46 and 101, and I see it going that direction before it ever benefits Atascadero personally. I don't know. I lived here with Cuesta Grade being a very small road and then expanding to 3 lanes. That happened twice, once in the 80s and once a few years ago. So I'm not sure if it's in our best interest or not to support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the public wishing to speak on this item? Okay, seeing no one, I will bring it back to council for discussion, and then ultimately we need to make a motion one way or the other. I will start with comments on my right this time with Councilmember Newsom.
I appreciate that SLOCOG has put in a lot of effort to bring this forward. I know it's been a challenge not everybody always agrees with, but I think it's something that probably should be put out there to the voters to see if that's what they want.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Funk?
Yeah. I want to thank the SLOCOG staff for taking our previous comments seriously and doing some fine tuning in this approach so that we can have something that is more efficient for all the jurisdictions and does a better job, so that if it is passed, it is something that looks like it can work.
And my understanding tonight is we're not making a recommendation on whether whether voters should support this or even whether this should be put on the ballot. But if voters choose to approve it after it is put on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors or by the Citizen Initiative or whatever, that we would approve of this plan for the expenditure of these funds. And I can work with that, and you can clean up the language later.
Thank you. I would comment that, anytime, you put something on the ballot and then it's essentially asking the voters whether or not they want to increase a tax, the relevant question is, what are we going to pay and what are we going to get out of it? And the way this plan is written, I see it as particularly beneficial to Atascadero, because in terms of what our citizens would have put into it, we're basically going to get that back right away in the 55% that comes directly to our city to fund directly city-controlled projects. So we're essentially ahead of the game day one with this expenditure plan. Then we have our opportunity to partake in the regional funds. And, we may not always, win that argument. I would take it, frankly, that sometimes improvements on Highway 46 might have more emotional appeal to some others, but we will get some share of the regional money. Then you have that third pot of, by having this money, you're so much more competitive for the state and federal matching grants. And in some of these larger scale projects that there simply isn't, currently enough funding and you're not competitive for state and federal grants, putting ourselves in play for that third pot of money puts us even further ahead of the game. So that for our citizens, this measure would be a darn good deal in particular, probably almost more than any other city in the county. And so I'm very comfortable that for Atascadero, it's a very good expenditure plan and feel very comfortable. And, you let the voters decide. I mean, if they say, yes, great, we'll use the money to good effect. If they say no, then, they're making a choice. So I feel very comfortable with approving the plan and approving them, going ahead and putting it forward.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I couldn't agree with the mayor more. Thank you very much for your presentation and the changes, I guess, that were made since the last time we were here. But I think it's a good deal for Atascadero, and I feel comfortable with supporting it as well.
Councilmember Peak.
Yeah, thank you. We are endorsing it as a city council. I mean, you can put it to vote and you can say that we're not, but if we say, yeah, let's push it forward, then as a city council, we are endorsing that we want it to be decided upon by the voters. And if something was something that majority were saying we don't want to do it, then we would be signaling that it's not right for the city. I think we had D20, we had F14 that turned into L24. We got sewer rate increases last year. We have sewer rate increases this year. Probably more down the pike. I mean, if we wanted to raise $2 million, we could just raise our own half-a-cent sales tax and repave Amapola as a say no. We can take care of our town. I don't see the net benefit of a regional pool outweighing the public sentiment of raising our taxes right now. And I'm a no.
Okay, with those comments, do I have a motion? All right. I mean, to be clear, let me find the commentary, but I mean, I will move.
Yeah,
I will move approval move that we adopt the draft resolution approving the SLOCOG final draft transportation expenditure plan for potential transportation sales tax measure.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mayor Bourbeau, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Dares. Can we roll call, please?
Councilmember Funk,
yes.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Councilmember Peak,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Dares,
Yes.
Mayor Bourbeau.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1 with Councilmember Peak a no.
Okay, all right, thank you. We will move on to the next item, which, as indicated, is item D6, which we had pulled earlier from the consent calendar. This is regarding the 2026 to 30 Animal Control Services Agreement with the county. And I don't want the chief to have to go through a full presentation on this, but just kind of respond to questions. My concern, of course, is $396,000. This is over $1,000 a day, over $30,000 a month for this services. And I was on the council some time ago when Atascadero and Paso Robles initially said, no, we're not going to participate in the new grand animal shelter. We thought, it was just way too expensive. We didn't like the way they were calculating costs. They said they would change some things. I think they did for a little bit, but now we're back to the here's your bill, pay it and shut up mode of operation, at least in my mind. And what my questions are is looking back to the calculations as to how the bill is arrived at. It's a 3-year rolling average of, or averaging the previous 3 years of kind of like Atascadero's share of the expenses of running animal control, both in terms of paying for the very expensive building there, but also in terms of the operational piece. And before there was, looking back to an old report, there was a substantial level of detail as to how the numbers were calculated. And my concern was that we or you, Chief, since it falls under your purview, is, looking at the inputs to these cost calculations. In other words, how are they determined? And do we have any ability to lessen the amount of service, if you will, that Atascadero uses? Because at the time, 5 years ago, we in Paso had by far the highest costs, highest percentage of costs, much more than other cities. And I'm curious, do you know what our percentage is now? Because back then it was like 14% was Atascadero and 18% was Paso Robles.
I do have that. As a matter of fact, if we could put that, I got a hold of Eric Anderson. He's the manager down there, and he sent me some information that I thought might be helpful to help answer some of these questions. So I don't have those in your packet, but I do have something I can display for you, and Luke is going to help us get that up. Oh, I have control. And since I'm just going to skip right to the numbers here. And I think this is the numbers that you're looking for under the projected percentage under Atascadero. The 12.62% would be that 3-year, where we are currently on that 3-year rolling average. And that is the representation that we represent.
Okay. That shows, our percentage, which is at 12.62% of the total cost, which is, better than the 14.37 back in 2000, 15, 16. But in terms of the components, at the time, there was some level of detail as to, it was like how many animals were being picked up in Atascadero. And at the time, it was like, was there anywhere to reduce that? And I know we pursued the idea or pressed on the idea that, okay, we don't need you to pick up stray cats in Atascadero.
Correct.
But I'm reading your report, I understand that's actually been implemented?
It has, so they are working under that implementation. They are not picking up stray cats. There is a methodology and a philosophy to that, and how it actually can reduce length of stay of the animals, which may have been part of the reason why we reduced from 14% to the 12.62%. Yes, so the short answer to that is yes, that is where we are with that.
Okay. And I'm just curious, so is there any other opportunities for us to look at what are the cost drivers for Atascadero, and any ways that we would control those or be able to reduce those?
Right. So since the thing that offsets the cost is the revenues, and so where we might have an opportunity for any type of revenues is trying to encourage people to license their animals. This can help reduce the length of stay because now, the animals that maybe are picked up will either be returned to the owner right away, or the length of stay for that particular animal will be very, very short. So trying to get more licensing done is a way to offset some of our costs. Really, other than that, you know, the stray, not picking up the stray cats was a cost reduction, obviously. But really, it's a lot of call for service oriented. That's how the costs are generated. So it's hard to reduce those calls for service.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilmember Funk, I believe you had questions.
Yes, and I asked quite a few questions on this in advance, with the same kinds of concerns that the mayor has just been expressing, back when, you know, a number of years ago. Essentially, the county had a whole racket going on where they would sweep up all the stray cats and feral cats in Atascadero and, you know, take them in down to the county. The cats were miserable. They would keep them for, you know, weeks because nobody was coming to pick up these feral cats, of course. And then they would end up euthanizing the cats and charging us for that extended length of stay, and we had no power to change it. And they used that to push off a lot of the shared costs onto our community. So that's why I call it a racket. I want to be very mindful as we go forward. I want to see the staff be mindful of not letting the county push costs off onto our community. And that means monitoring the metrics, looking at the right performance metrics. That's why I asked the length of stay should be a performance metric that is monitored. It was not mentioned in the packet, and I was relieved to hear from you, Chief, that is in fact closely monitored and monitored by animal type.
Yes.
Because this does vary. Like the mayor, I want to see us looking for opportunities to manage the costs that animals in our community impose on the system, and whether there are ways that we can manage things better so that we impose and incur fewer costs. So we're not carrying such a heavy load of the overall thing.
Can I add something real quick?
Sure.
You know, I wasn't here a couple years ago when all that took place, but what I can tell you over the last 2 years that I have been here, the communication and the relationship that I've had with the management down there with Eric Anderson has been very transparent. If I ask for something or data or whatnot, he will provide it. He's very proactive. They have been living up to their obligation of having their annual and biannual meetings with us. My experience so far has been very positive, and I would anticipate that if we had any questions and any details that we really wanted to know more about, he's been very, very good about that.
It might be helpful to have, you know, some kind of briefing. We had the occasion for this briefing that have some occasional, you know, once a year or something here how things are going with that, so that we know that relationship is staying constructive, and that our taxpayer costs are being spent as efficiently as possible. The other thing where I want to see performance metrics communicated on and discussed is on euthanasia. It is unfortunately always necessary with pets, sometimes to do that. Most of us who have pets have had to put down an animal that just is not where it can live on, and it's hard. But what we want to monitor for is whether the shelter is going back into euthanizing animals that are adoptable, but just haven't been adopted in particular, because at least on the private side of this with Woods, they routinely get animals from other communities because we don't have as many animals to adopt here as people are willing to adopt. So I want to make sure if we're getting into a situation of avoidable euthanasia of animals, that there's communication about it, so that those who care about animals in the community can organize for action and maybe make that not have to happen.
I think that we can ask for that data, but I mean, that's, you know, kind of their operational considerations, how they do that.
Sure. It wasn't on the performance metric.
I understand.
And so we need to see that in the data.
Got it.
Thank you.
Okay. Does any other member of the council have any questions? Okay. Seeing none, I'll see if there's any public comment. No public comment coming forward. Then we'll return it back to council for a motion.
I'll move approval of consent item number 6.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Funk, a second by Councilmember Newsom. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk,
Yes.
Councilmember Newsom,
Yes.
Councilmember Peak,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Daris,
Yes.
Mayor Verbo.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, excellent. We will move on then to council announcements and committee reports. We'll start on my left, Councilmember Peak.
Yeah, we get to meet with the city and schools committee this Friday at the district office, which would be great to get some updates from school district staff. Other than that, there are a few different service club things going on the next couple months around town, and I'm looking forward to a beautiful spring.
Capsule met last Thursday. Unfortunately, I don't have any of my notes. So, but there wasn't really anything of really note to report. And that's all I have. Thanks.
All right, thanks. I'll just report tomorrow is the city selection committee. Doesn't meet very often. This is my first time attending the city selection committee as mayor. And we will be discussing appointment to LAFCO, and Councilmember Funk is an applicant for that position. That's all I have to report.
As the mayor's just reported, well, I'll be at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Also on Thursday morning, there is a special meeting of the Homeless Services Oversight Council at 9 o'clock. That's, I believe, directed at some grant approvals that for which the timing couldn't accommodate our regular meetings. And there was a meeting last week of the Atascadero Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And I diligently attempted to join remotely under the rules that allow that after conferring with the city attorney and getting clearance for joining remotely. But the technology was unsuccessful in my being able to join in. So I ended up texting my questions to John Neal, who was staffing that particular committee, and at least engaging with the conversation. I will continue to follow up because the link I was using to connect was a link that was available for members of the public who might also wanted to watch that meeting. And not only was I unable to participate, I was unable to see the meeting. And so that's a problem for how the agency operates, but it's a technical glitch and we'll all get over it. And I believe Nick was there representing the city's interests, Mr. DeBar, and that the only exciting thing was that we approved the annual water report for going out for people to review it. Right? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Newsom.
I have nothing to report.
All right, thank you all. Does anybody have any individual determinations? Yep, seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.